Welcome to NTD Newsroom. I'm Fiona G.
And I'm Kevin Hogan.
A $20 billion foreign investment to build new data centers in the U.S. President-elect Trump welcoming the funding.
Mark Zuckerberg says his platforms are done fact-checking your posts. He says Trump's recent election win feels like a cultural point, so he's bringing Facebook and Instagram back to their roots of free expression. We talked to constitutional scholar John Eastman about the news.
Former President Jimmy Carter making his final journey to Washington, D.C. A lying-in-state ceremony is planned for the Capitol.
Over 100 people are reported dead in Tibet after a powerful earthquake struck the area. Why Tibet's government-in-exile blames the Chinese Communist Party for the earthquake.
New Orleans begins its carnival season with the Joan of Arc Parade. The event comes just days after a terrorist killed 14 people and injured dozens of others by ramming a truck into a crowd on New Year's Day.
This is NTD Newsroom, live from our global headquarters in New York City.
In a wide-ranging press conference, President-elect Trump reacts to the latest developments in his legal battles and teases plans to take Greenland, Panama Canal, and Canada as part of the U.S.
That's right, and joining us now live from West Palm Beach is NTD's White House correspondent, Iris Tao. Iris, good afternoon. What's the latest we're hearing from the president-elect?
Good afternoon to you both as well. So today's press conference was Trump's first public remarks after his election win was officially certified yesterday by Congress. And in this press conference, he talked about a variety of topics, including his upcoming foreign policy, the ongoing transition process, as well as what's been facing on the legal front. He talked about how the transition process, as opposed to what administration has promised, is actually not going smoothly. In particular, he criticized what he calls lawfare, and he says that they're still playing with the courts even until this day, and that was a quote by Mr. Trump. Specifically, he's talking about the ongoing cases, for example, in New York. The latest development today being that a New York appeals court has again denied Trump's request to delay his sentencing in the New York business record case, which was set for this upcoming Friday, just 10 days before his inauguration. And the Trump's team was trying to get the sentencing delayed, arguing that it would interfere with the ongoing presidential transition, adding that the case should be paused and nothing should proceed until the appeals court finishes reviewing the Trump's presidential immunity argument. But the latest development today, after Judge Juan Merchan already denied that request, was that the appeals court struck it down as well. Meanwhile, Trump did get a legal win in another case today, though, and Judge Eileen Cannon temporarily blocks a special counsel Jack Smith's release of his reports into his two investigations into President Trump. And Trump today reacting to the latest development during the press conference and adding that the report and the case itself was, quote, fake. Let's take a look.
And it'll be a fake report just like the investigation was a fake investigation because it was a fake case against a political opponent. They thought they were going to use this to beat me.
And Trump today again defending himself on all of these cases, saying, quote, I did absolutely nothing wrong, and quote, I won all these cases. Meanwhile, another major agenda on his press conference today that he was trying to tell the public was his upcoming foreign policy agenda. Trump has been teasing, we know that his plans to, for example, to potentially incorporate the Panama Canal and Greenland into the U.S. for national security purpose. And he again doubled down on his plans today. In particular, he refused to commit to not using military force or economic coercion to get his plans complete. He says that, for example, the Panama Canal was built for the U.S. military, but is now operated by Chinese government. He adds that Greenland is needed as well for national security purpose as there are Chinese ships all around. Here's what he said about it. Watch.
I'm not going to commit to that now. It might be that you'll have to do something. Look, the Panama Canal is vital to our country. It's being operated by China. China.
And he was also asked if he would also not commit to using military force or economic coercion to potentially make Canada the 51st state of the U.S. He says he will not use military force against Canada, but will try to use, for example, tariffs and economic measures to potentially make Canada part of the country already. He says it would be a great country if the two, U.S. and Canada, would be merged together. He also says that he will rename the Gulf of Mexico to the Gulf of America, saying that it incorporates a lot of territory. Meanwhile, on foreign wars, he also spoke about the Middle East situation today, saying that, again, warning that there will be hell in the Middle East if the hostages weren't returned back by the time he takes office. His envoy to the Middle East, Stephen Wickoff, was here today during the press conference, and he also said that he looks forward to potentially have some good news, good things to announce by the time Trump takes office in just about 2 weeks. Trump also talked about the Russia situation, saying that Putin wants to talk to him, but he will wait until after the inauguration, then when he becomes the actual president, to make that communication. He also, of course, talked about the ongoing situation and the wars, saying that he will try to bring peace to these countries. Back to you.
Certainly lots to digest there, Iris. Thank you for the update.
President-elect Trump has named his choice for U.S. Attorney for the Eastern District of New York, Joseph Nocella Jr. Trump wrote on Truth Social yesterday that Nocella has a strong record of ensuring law and order in New York. He said Nocella was an assistant U.S. attorney in the same district during the early 90s. Nocella is a Columbia Law School graduate and a judge in Nassau County. The district includes Nassau and Suffolk counties on Long Island, along with Kings County and Brooklyn, Richmond County on Staten Island, and Queens County. The current U.S. attorney for the district is set to resign on January 10th.
Donald Trump Jr. arrived in Greenland's capital this morning. He said that his father, President-elect Trump, said hello to everyone in Greenland.
The visit comes as Trump continues to call for U.S. ownership of the Danish territory.
We're a little pressed for time because we only have a couple hours of daylight, so we got to see everything, but we're really excited to be here. Thank you guys so much. Just here as tourists, seeing it looks like an incredible place. We've been talking about going for a while. I was actually supposed to be here last spring for some of the stuff I do in my free time, but just really excited to be here. Awesome country. The scenery coming in was just spectacular, so just very excited to be here. Thank you.
Denmark's foreign ministry yesterday acknowledged the planned trip, but said it was not being called an official visit. In a Truth Social post, Trump Sr. said his son would travel to Greenland along with various representatives. He added that the people of the island off the Canadian coast will benefit if and when it becomes part of the U.S.
When Trump first floated the idea of purchasing Greenland from Denmark in December, the territory's prime minister said the island was not for sale and never will be. The prime minister has been pushing for Greenland's independence. In his New Year's speech, he said the island needs to break the shackles of colonialism.
And continuing with the Trump administration, President-elect Trump's incoming chief of staff, Susie Wiles, has outlined her vision for a smooth second term. Wiles co-managed Trump's campaign. She promises a disciplined West Wing focused on teamwork and swiftly delivering on the president-elect's promises to voters. Wiles emphasized that success hinges on teamwork and shared goals in an interview with Axios published yesterday. She made it clear that solo players seeking drama will not be part of the team. Wiles earned the nickname Ice Maiden for her efficient management of the campaign and unflappable demeanor. Wiles said Trump learned the hard way from his first-term setbacks. He now knows that having a team that is both competent and loyal is key to success. The new chair of the House Foreign Affairs Committee plans to move a bill this week to sanction the ICC, that's the International Criminal Court. This comes after the ICC issued an arrest warrant for Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu. A congressional aide said the Foreign Affairs Chair, Brian Mast, could get a vote on the House floor by Thursday. The bill would sanction anyone working to prosecute American citizens or officials from U.S. allied nations, including Israel. It would also halt U.S. funding for the ICC. The Foreign Affairs Chair said the bill sends a clear message to the ICC, adding that the court has prolonged the war and prevented the release of American hostages.
Facebook's parent company Meta will stop fact-checking user content in the United States. Meta CEO Mark Zuckerberg announced today it's time to get back to our roots around free expression on Facebook and Instagram.
Now, Facebook started its fact-checking program after President-elect Donald Trump was elected back in 2016. It worked with third-party fact-checkers to rate the truthfulness of content, leading to posts being removed or flagged. Today, Zuckerberg said the fact-checking system led to too many mistakes and too much censorship. Here he is.
After Trump first got elected in 2016, the legacy media wrote nonstop about how misinformation was a threat to democracy. We tried in good faith to address those concerns without becoming the arbiters of truth. But the fact checkers have just been too politically biased and have destroyed more trust than they've created, especially in the US. So over the next
Meta will replace the fact-checking program with community notes. That would be like the system used by Elon Musk's platform X. User feedback is collected and tagged onto pieces of content, giving users more context. Facebook will also remove content rules related to topics such as immigration and gender.
Zuckerberg said the rules are, quote, out of touch with mainstream discourse. The Facebook CEO recently met with Trump at Mar-a-Lago. He said that Meta will be working with the president-elect to push back against governments around the world that are seeking to censor people, including the Chinese Communist Party. Zuckerberg said Trump's recent election win felt like a cultural tipping point. And joining us now for further discussion on this topic is constitutional lawyer and former dean at Chapman University School of Law, John Eastman. John, good afternoon. Thank you for joining us. Now, we just heard there a clip of what Zuckerberg had to say about this decision, but he did not mention any legal concerns factoring into this decision. Do you think Meta was at all worried, perhaps, about lawsuits over its actions to censor certain people or content?
Well, I think they were increasingly worried about losing the immunity protections they have in federal law. I mean, those protections are based on the fact that they're platforms, not editorial content censors. There have been a number of rumblings over the recent years about removing those exemptions from their liability. Look, being a victim of their censorship regime itself, what they were doing is taking as fact things that were hotly disputed and not allowing this primary public square in modern America to be the source where those ideas and disputes were vetted, shutting down one side and letting the other determine what was true or not. It was taking on a very Orwellian cast to it. And I'm delighted that Mark Zuckerberg has realized the mistake that was and is going forward. Although I will say the community comments oftentimes parallel the old fact-checking thing and make statements on disputed questions as if there's only one version of truth on these things. And I think that carefully as well.
Now, speaking about the censorship that you mentioned, Zuckerberg has also recently come out to say that the Biden administration pressured Meta to censor content, especially related to the pandemic. How do you see this issue of free speech online and government efforts to control it sort of playing out legally or otherwise over the next decade?
Well, one hopes that the courts will step in vigorously and particularly not allow government to pressure private entities to censor speech. Government can't do that on its own, and it shouldn't be able to do it pressuring a third party as well. The Missouri case that the Supreme Court punted on last term, the evidence there of government pressure on the social media platforms was so great that I'm disappointed the court didn't take it up and resolve it then. But it's very clear that the court in defending the First Amendment against those kind of attacks when a case comes to it that requires it to reach that decision. And so I think we're going to find the government not allowed to do that, as they haven't been allowed to do since 1789 when that First Amendment was passed. But we're now in uncharted territory with how much power over the public discussion that these private social media platforms have. And I think that needs to be looked at as well. Have they become tantamount to the public square where they shouldn't be allowed to censor speech either, even though they're a private platform?
Right, and Zuckerberg actually called Trump's recent win a cultural tipping point. Now, what exactly do you think he means by that, and why would that be a concern for his platforms?
Well, I think what he means and what the American people meant by that resounding election victory for President Trump is that they've had it with being shut down in ordinary discourse. They've had it with the lawfare going hard against anybody that dared to challenge the government, whether it was on COVID vaccines or the origin of COVID, the young boys competing against your young daughters in swim meets or track meets, or middle-aged men exposing themselves in public locker rooms. If you or the 2020 election controversy itself, if you dared to speak up against the government narrative, you were hounded, you were lawfared, and you were censored. And I think the cultural change is that none of that worked to stop Trump and his supporters from winning the election. And I think that's the new turn the page that American people have insisted on.
Now, John, from what you're seeing, what is the major difference between 2017 when Trump first came into office versus now? Because back then, Facebook introduced fact checkers, and then today it's showing those very fact checkers the door.
I think the main difference is the 4 years of the Biden administration. It's the difference at home when people saw the censorship and didn't like it, and it's the difference abroad. International leaders looked with some skepticism on President Trump back in 2017. But after the last disastrous 4 years, they are lining up to shake hands with him and stand next to him in pictures in Paris at the Notre Dame opening ceremony and flying to Mar-a-Lago to meet with him because they understand the long-standing principle that America is a shining city on the hill. And when we manifest that and demonstrate to our friends and our enemies peace through strength, and will not tolerate kind of foreign dictators taking over lands near them, then the world ends up more at peace. And I think the world leaders are recognizing what a disaster the last 4 years have been and welcoming a turning of the page on that front as well.
Now, speaking of going to Mar-a-Lago, John, you were there recently for the premiere of a new documentary, The Eastman Dilemma: Lawfare of Justice. And it's about the treatment of attorneys who represent conservative clients. And you yourself have faced a lot of heat for backing Trump when he contested the 2020 election. So what are your expectations as Trump takes power again this month?
Well, look, this lawfare was such an egregious assault on our system of justice. Our bar disciplinary proceedings explicitly designed to scare lawyers away from representing causes or clients that the narrative of the left says you shouldn't be representing. I mean, it's anathema to our system of justice. Look, one of our heroes, legal heroes in our history, was John Adams, who represented the British soldiers following the Boston Massacre. Now, he caught a lot of heat for that, but we've recognized in our history what a courageous and important thing it was to do. Unfortunately, the last 4 years, we've seen exactly the opposite. And I think the reason we did this documentary, and I was just so delighted that President Trump came to watch it with Prime Minister Maloney. The reason we did this documentary is to let the American people know what was going on so that they can rise up and tell their elected officials, we're not going to tolerate this anymore. And more importantly, I think the incoming leadership of the Department of the FBI, who understand what was going on and the significance of it and the grave risks it posed to us as a people, I think they're going to do something about it and fully investigate, and where the investigation shows is warranted, bring criminal prosecutions against people that engaged in what my view is a criminal conspiracy to deprive people of civil rights, their First Amendment rights of speech and petitioning the government for redress of grievances, foremost among them. And I think holding people to account is something that we should expect out of the incoming administration.
John, I want to get your legal expertise on this. Today, Trump again talked about the people who were indicted for going to the Capitol building on January 6th of 2021, and he's saying that he will pardon them. What are you expecting to happen here legally? I mean, will a pardon be the end of it for them from a legal perspective?
Well, a pardon should be the end of it from a legal perspective. But what we're seeing in some of the lawfare, not all of it was federal. I'm still under indictment in Georgia and Arizona for the legal advice I gave to the president and shining a light on illegality in the conduct of the 2020 election. And those state officials, those state prosecutors are not bound by anything that President Trump can do as the federal president. And they seem to have gotten the wrong message about the election, that the American people are tired of what they're doing, and they're doubling down. Now, crafting claims, state claims against the J6ers, I think is going to be even harder to do, and hopefully this will amount to an exoneration of them. Look, there were some people that engaged in criminal conduct, but by and large, most people, the doors were open to them. The notifications on barriers that said they were entering a private, secured location that was normally open to the public, those signs were hidden behind bushes. So many people at most engaged in trespass and did so unwittingly. Even those that engaged in violence oftentimes were provoked into it by, I think, overly aggressive police tactics that you normally don't see in crowd control situations like that. And if you compare the sentences that handed down and the charges that were brought, 20-year felonies for obstructing Congress, a use of an old mob witness intimidation statute that had never been used in this context, and compare that to the light hand, if no hand at all, sanctions that were pressed against the people that engaged in real serious violence across the land in the summer before the 2020 election. And you compare those, and it really gives lie to the claim of equal justice under the law that adorns the top of the Supreme Court. We got to get back to treating people equally. If people engage in criminal conduct, they should get the same kind of sentence and prosecution that other people that engaged in nearly identical or even worse conduct. Right. And if people are merely trespassing as part of their protest, their exercise of free speech rights, they should get at most a minor misdemeanor charge. I think all of that's going to be handled by these pardons.
All right, John, before we go here, I also want to get your take on what President-elect Trump's plans would be around what he's called the lawfare that's being used against him.
Well, in my view, and I've seen enough to know that there was coordination going on. We've got evidence of the special prosecutor in Fulton County, Georgia, meeting with White House officials, and he claims he doesn't remember what they talked about, but he's billing the Fulton County DA's office on the Georgia indictment case for it. So that's a pretty good indication. We have in Arizona, discovered about a month ago, an explosive collusion between the Attorney General and one of the virulently anti-Trump lawfare organizations called States United Democracy Center. And the Attorney General hired them to prepare the prosecution strategy for her to go against Trump and his supporters. I mean, that's like hiring the fox to prepare a safety memo for your henhouse. It's utter nonsense. But that level of collusion, in my view, constitutes a conspiracy to deprive people of their civil rights. And that's a federal crime. And I say one of the ways you push back against this lawfare is holding people accountable for it with criminal charges where they're warranted, so that people get a message that you're not going to do that again.
John Eastman, thank you for joining us today.
Thank you so much for having me. Take care.
And coming up, President Biden is finalizing a rule that would end the addition of medical debt on credit reports.
And over 100 people are reported dead in Tibet after a powerful earthquake struck the area. Why Tibet's government-in-exile blames the Chinese Communist Party for the earthquake. Stay tuned for that coverage.
This is such a gentle painting, so beautifully portrayed.
A group of people reading together in this simple, everyday-looking living room. A young girl reading along with an adult, a grandparent sitting in the lotus position, a businessman in his typical suit.
You see all those people, they look like they have quietly settled down there. And you as a viewer, it looks like you've just stepped in the door.
You can't see what it is they're reading, so you're a little bit curious and you're kind of invited to walk in.
This harmonious feeling is not by accident. It is the very subject of the work. The book they are reading is the main text of Falun Gong, which is an ancient Chinese spiritual discipline in the Buddhist tradition. At the core of Falun Gong are the values of truthfulness, compassion, and forbearance. Unfortunately, The practice is banned in China, where the artist resides. Thousands have been killed for their faith. Golden energy blooms into the room as a result of their steadfast faith. The painting on the back wall reminds us of this work's title, Plum Blossoms in a Muddy World.
It's also a metaphor for the practitioners that are sitting in the room as plum blossoms.
They signify perseverance and hope that all brutal winters end and life is renewed once again.
The magical painting.
Just like all of you, I had problems sleeping. I had tried every pillow out there and nothing worked. I'd flip-flop all night, use my arm for support, and fall asleep, or I'd wake up with a sore neck or maybe a headache. Well, quality sleep comes from keeping your neck straight at night. You have to fill in that space between your head and your bed. That's why I invented MyPillow. MyPillow's patented fill adjusts to your exact individual needs, and it doesn't matter if you sleep on your back, stomach, side, or any combination of all three.
When I got MyPillow, I'm asleep almost immediately. I stay asleep at night, and I wake up more well-rested in the morning.
So go to MyPillow.com or call the number on your screen. Use your promo code to get Classic King MyPillows for only $19.98. Queen size just $18.98. Standard Classic MyPillows only $14.98. That's right, only $14.98. Plus all orders $75 or more ship absolutely free.
Thanks for staying with us. Some Americans with medical debt could soon get a boost on their credit score. Leading up to his final days in office, President Biden is finalizing a rule that will end the addition of medical debt on credit reports. If Congress doesn't rescind the rule, about 15 million people will have an estimated $49 billion removed from their scores. That's according to the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau. The rule will also ban lenders from using medical devices like wheelchairs or prosthetic limbs as collateral for loans. They also can't repossess them if patients aren't able to repay the loans. Lenders can, however, continue to consider medical information when a person requests a loan to pay for health expenses or asks for a temporary postponement of loan payments for medical reasons. The rule will take effect 60 days after it is published in the Federal Register.
Biden is declaring 2 new national monuments in California today in one of his last moves to protect American land and water before leaving the White House. The president is establishing the Chuckwalla National Monument in the southern part of the state and the Satitla National Monument in the northern half. The designation protects the areas from fossil fuel drilling and mining. The Interior Department says the areas are also not suitable for solar energy development. Both monument areas are sacred to Native tribes who have been asking for the designation. Biden created or expanded 12 national monuments while president and restored 3 others.
Over 100 people are reported dead in Tibet after a powerful earthquake struck the area.
Tibet's government-in-exile blames the Chinese Communist Party for the many deaths. Here's what they're saying.
A strong earthquake struck the foothills of the Himalayas near one of Tibet's holiest cities on Tuesday. The quake killed at least 126 people and destroyed hundreds of houses, according to Chinese authorities. The magnitude 6.8 earthquake's epicenter was about 50 miles north of Mount Everest, the world's highest mountain. Tremors also shook buildings in neighboring Nepal, Bhutan, and India.
Hold China accountable for such an event that takes place.
A member of Tibet's parliament-in-exile says China is to blame for Tuesday's earthquake and the deaths that came with it.
One of the most important causes is the mining, excessive amount of natural resources mining that is taking place under the Chinese Communist Party.
She says China digs into Tibet's mountains to mine them without taking the necessary steps to preserve those mountains. The members of Tibet's parliament-in-exile are currently living in neighboring India. This comes after the Chinese Communist Party invaded Tibet in the 1950s.
Since the occupation of Tibet, China has been exploiting the natural resources. You will have more and more disasters that are all made by man, the Chinese wrong policy.
Rescue work is now underway. People are clearing through the rubble to see if they can find any survivors. The official number of casualties could become higher if more dead bodies are found.
The Guatemalan national accused of burning a sleeping woman to death inside a New York City subway car pleaded not guilty today to murder and arson charges. Prosecutors say Sebastian Zepeda lit 57-year-old Debrina Kawam on fire at Brooklyn's Coney Island station on December 22nd. The 33-year-old then allegedly fanned the flames with a shirt before sitting on a platform bench to watch her burn. The brutal murder is one of the latest instances of violent crime in the nation's largest mass transit system. On Christmas Eve, a man slashed two people in Manhattan's Grand Central subway station. Days later, a man survived being shoved onto subway tracks ahead of an oncoming train. Immigration authorities say Zepeda entered the country illegally after being deported in 2018. Two bodies were found in the landing gear compartment of a JetBlue aircraft at a South Florida airport.
Authorities gave an update today after the bodies were discovered in the wheel well area last night at the Fort Lauderdale International Airport.
I can share that the individuals who deceased are both males. Beyond that, their identities at this time are unknown. That is one of the questions that detectives are seeking to answer. Of course, if there's anyone who might have information regarding this incident and the circumstances leading up to it, Broward Sheriff's Office detectives would like to hear from them.
A JetBlue spokesperson said they were found during a routine post-flight maintenance inspection. The aircraft had arrived in Fort Lauderdale shortly after 11 p.m. from John F. Kennedy International Airport in New York. The names of the people or other details have not yet been released.
The discovery comes just 2 weeks after a body was found in the wheel well of a United Airlines flight traveling from Chicago to Maui. An FAA report from 2011 says about 80% of stowaways who attempt to fly in a plane's wheel well die from freezing, a lack of oxygen, or being crushed by a plane's landing gear.
Two inmates on death row are rejecting clemency. They're among the 37 inmates whose sentences President Joe Biden commuted last month, sparing them from execution. Court documents reveal that Shannon Agofsky and Len Davis are both refusing to accept the clemency action and have filed an emergency motion to block the change. That's because if they accept, it would remove the heightened scrutiny that death penalty appeals receive, which is when courts examine cases closer for errors. The inmates might not be able to restore their death sentences since the Supreme Court ruled that a president can grant reprieves and pardons without a convict's consent. NVIDIA has unveiled new software technology at CES 2025 and its growth potential for the company. CEO Jensen Huang laid out how it's bringing its technology to consumer PCs and laptops with Cosmos Foundation models, which generates photorealistic video. He said those videos can be used to train robots and self-driving cars at much lower costs. NVIDIA's RTX 50 series chips aim to give video games movie-like graphics. The new chips will help video game developers generate more accurate human faces and add more realistic imperfections to background objects. The chips will range in price from about $550 to $2,000 and will be available as early as the end of next month.
The U.S. is rolling out a consumer labeling system designed to help Americans pick smart devices that are less vulnerable to hacking. Amazon, Best Buy, Google, LG, and Samsung are among industry participants. Under the U.S. Cyber Trust Mark Initiative, manufacturers can affix the label on their products if they meet federal cybersecurity standards. The types of devices that can seek to carry the label include baby monitors, home security cameras, fitness trackers, and other devices. The labels will include a distinctive Shield logo as well as QR codes that consumers can scan for more information. Products bearing the label should be available this year once manufacturers begin submitting their devices for approval. Participation is voluntary. And McDonald's is flipping on its diversity, equity, and inclusion policies. The company sent out an email to restaurant owners, operators, employers, and suppliers. The fast food chain said it would retire its practice of aspirational representation goals. It is also doing away with the pledge to hire a diverse group of suppliers. McDonald's is also renaming its diversity team the Global Inclusion Team. The company said it reassessed its DEI policies after the Supreme Court ruled against race-conscious admission programs in universities in 2023. McDonald's noted that the legal landscape had shifted and other companies were reevaluating their DEI initiatives.
Coming up, in France, farmers are trying to revive a protest movement by blocking access to Paris. Police stopped them before reaching the capital and prevented the demonstrations. We'll have that and more after this break.
When I arrived in the U.S. at 19, I struggled to find job opportunities without a high school diploma. My name is Ariel, and my entire life changed when I took a chance and I got my high school diploma at age 22. Everything I have, my education, my career, my marriage, I owe to the Adult Literacy Center and my teachers. They were with me every step of the way, helping with my English and math, making sure I pushed through all the challenges. Oh my goodness.
So Ariel, we made this yearbook for you. It has notes from all the people that are here. Your achievement has set an example for so many students. Most importantly, your daughter.
Education was the key that unlocked all my opportunities.
When you graduate, they graduate. Visit finishyourdiploma.org to find free and supportive adult education centers near you.
Discover the ancient secret to vitality and longevity with Puretang Black Ginseng. Crafted from premium 6-year-old Korean ginseng, each root is carefully nurtured for over 2,260 days, undergoing a traditional 9-round handcrafted process of steaming and drying to unlock full potency and absorption. Experience pure, natural energy with Puretang Black Ginseng. Order now at puretang.com.
Kids love it. Parents trust it. Obviously. Explore GJW Plus Kids Series and Ganjiong Campus courses led by expert educators. This is spectacular. Children will learn values like respect, responsibility, and knowledge in language, science, and more. Wow. All while having fun. Perfect. Subscribe today at GJW Plus Kids, where learning meets fun.
In 4 days. There was an old woman who lived in a shoe. She had so many children. She didn't know what to do.
Did you have a good day at school?
She gave them some broth without any bread.
There you go.
And kissed them all soundly.
Night night.
Good night. And put them to bed. Hunger is a story we can end. End it at feedingamerica.org.
Thanks for staying with us. Public sector workers are waiting to feel the impact of a new act signed into law by President Biden. The Social Security Fairness Act is a measure that aims to boost Social Security payments for current and former public employees. It could affect millions of people who receive pensions. And joining us now to discuss is Dave Rose, Senior Research Fellow at AIER. Dave, thanks for joining us. So who exactly will this help?
Well, what is going on here is really quite disturbing. It's a situation that happens all too often these days, a situation where an act is named something quite different than what it is. This is not a situation where we have unfair treatment that's going to be rectified by a new law. In reality, it's a situation where before there was unfair treatment up to about 1983, then the amendments to the Social Security Act at that time corrected for that, or at least help address that unfair treatment. And that's a situation we've been in ever since. And that happened through the windfall elimination provision. What they're doing is getting rid of that. So this isn't a case of something bad that's being removed. This is a case of something that was bad, was fixed, and now we're going back to what was bad.
So why is this all happening now?
I think it's happening now because of political opportunism. This has been proposed many times over the years. This is something that it's easy to understand why people who have a pension from public employment early in their careers and then worked under covered Social Security employment later in their careers would like to have this windfall elimination provision removed. And the reason why they would want to do that is, of course, it means they'd get a bigger check. And what's going on here is the way the pension for Social Security payment for each month is determined, it involves some degree of redistribution. The first so many dollars of your average monthly income, as they determine it, is reimbursed to you, as it were, at 90%. It's restored to you, and then the next so many dollars is at 32%, and then everything thereafter is at 15%. The problem with that is in the calculation of the average monthly income base that they begin their calculations on. People who had a large public pension in the past before they started earning Social Security, they're going to have a lot of zeros in that calculation. It's going to make them look like they're poorer than they really are. So people who have really good jobs and really good pensions and then went on to another job later in life, so there's essentially double dipping, they're the ones who are going to have the largest recovery rate, which amounts to the lowest tax under Social Security. It makes no sense at all. The people who make the most money and have the most in terms of their pension are the ones that are going to get the most favorable returns. This is going to be very costly. The low bound estimate I've seen is 190 billion, upper bound 200 billion over the next 10 years. That is a large amount of money. That's the amount of money we would liberate if we increase the retirement age from 67 to 70. So that puts it in perspective. This is not a small thing.
Well, Dave, I'm following what you're saying here, and this comes as the Social Security program faces a looming potential crisis, insolvency, not being able to pay its debts. I mean, a government report found that by 2033, the entire program is going to run out of money, which means that there'll be an automatic 21% reduction in people's checks. So now you could comment on that more, or just as a whole, this whole thing has been described as a boondoggle. Is that fair or accurate?
I think boondoggle is fair. I really do. If you listen to how people justify it, who are for it, they always say things that are true at the margin, but not very meaningful. Like, well, we're just trying to be more generous with our public employees, or we're just trying to help people in their retirement. Well, of course, and when you give people more money, you're helping them. But that's really not the issue. The issue is this the right way to run the program? The program is already under severe fiscal stress. It needs reform. And we have now just added a great deal of additional fiscal stress. The people who will probably end up paying for this are people who really need Social Security the most. So in order to give people who make the most money even more money, we're going to imperil a program that was put there for people who don't make much money. It makes no sense.
So, Dave, do you see the incoming Trump administration making any changes to make this program more solvent?
There are a number of things we can do to make the program better, and some of them are not very painful at all. One thing that we can do is simply change the way that we adjust the initial benefit calculation. It's a kind of a technical issue, but the bottom line is currently they use wage index data to do so, and that's really not the right way to do it. The better way to do it would be price indexing. And if we did that, we would eliminate about 75% of the budget shortfall right there. Another thing that we could do that's relatively painless is to go to chain-weighted CPI adjustment for payments ongoing, after a person's already retired, as opposed to what we use now. And that overcomes a problem of a certain kind of bias, a technical bias that exists in the current approach. That would probably come close to eliminating the whole budget shortfall. So Social Security is something that can be solved. This is not an impossible problem, but we are making it harder on ourselves by engaging in really almost a boondoggle. Again, your word is correct.
Well, Dave Rose at AIER, thanks for helping us make sense of all this.
My pleasure.
Over now to Britain, where an investigator is urging action to tackle child grooming gangs and dismissing calls for further inquiries.
This comes amid an ongoing and heated debate over the issue between Elon Musk and Britain's Prime Minister. NTD's international correspondent Malcolm Hudson has more from London.
Alexis J., the lady behind Britain's independent inquiry into child sexual abuse, has called for urgent action rather than further inquiries into Britain's grooming gang scandal. This as political tensions over the scandal continue to grow. The grooming gang scandal revealed how gangs of mostly Pakistani men had groomed, trafficked and raped young white girls across numerous towns in Britain over decades. It returned to the political agenda following an ongoing row between Elon Musk and British Prime Minister Keir Starmer. Jay was the head of a 7-year inquiry published in October 2022 after reviewing evidence from 7,000 individuals.
Locally, people need to step up to the mark and do the sorts of things that have been recommended. I think there's something like 400 recommendations that we identified through a national charity in all the reviews that had already been carried out, and many of those were simply not met.
The row between Musk and Starmer has seen Musk claim Starmer failed to tackle the scandal when he was the UK's lead prosecutor. Starmer has defended his record, saying he tackled the gangs head-on. Though Jay said the row distracts from the issues, she also said she is pleased that the scandal and her recommendations were getting attention, and acknowledged the row may have given the government a push to act. Shadow Justice Secretary Robert Jenrick told the BBC that a lot has been learned from past reviews into grooming gangs and child abuse, but added recent revelations show a much bigger scale.
The Jay review, for example, looked at 6 towns. We now suspect that at least 50 towns have had grooming gangs of this kind. And so it's right that we have a full national inquiry.
He said a national inquiry would ensure victims have justice, it would help prevent other vulnerable girls from going through the same abuse, and it would hold officials who allegedly covered up the abuse to account. On Monday, Home Secretary Yvette Cooper said it's time for action, not more inquiries, and said the government will implement recommendations from past reviews.
First, I can confirm we will make it mandatory to report abuse. Second, we'll also legislate to make grooming an aggravating factor in the sentencing of child sexual offences. And third, we will overhaul the information and evidence that is gathered on child sexual abuse and exploitation and embed it in a clear new performance framework for policing.
She also committed to setting out more details about other recommendations in the future as well. Malcolm Hudson, NTD News, London.
Over to France now, where farmers are trying to revive a protest movement by blocking access to Paris. Police stopped them before reaching the capital and prevented the demonstrations. NTD's international correspondent David Vives spoke with a farmers' union representative. Take a look.
Around 200 French farmers staged protests near Paris on Monday against the EU-Mercosur trade deal. They demand better pay and protection for small farmers who feel threatened by the agreement. The demonstrations were led by Coordination Rurale, France's second-largest farmers' union.
We know less than 10% of products imported in Europe are up to EU standards. So we are calling for EU authorities to better monitor the quality of the products. Also, the standards should be the same for every farmer in Europe, which is not the case now.
Convoys of tractors and cars set out early Monday with the goal of reaching Paris. Police blocked their entry into the capital, citing bans on unauthorized gatherings. Some farmers forced their way through police blockades and managed to reach the capital.
We don't understand why police seem to harass us so much. We have been blocked and we've been given fines again and again. We can add them up in piles, actually. Some farmers went to Champs-Élysées in Paris just to show up, and they were fined too.
1 year after massive farmers' protests swept across Europe, some unions claim little has improved. Converse says he hopes that the new government will enforce measures to support farmers. Otherwise, more protests could be planned in the coming weeks. David Vives, NTD News, Paris.
The U.S. Department of Defense has added gaming giant Tencent to a list of firms allegedly aiding China's military. Also added are firms including battery maker CATL and China's largest shipping company, Costco. Here's a closer look.
Tencent shares fell over 7% in Hong Kong trade on Tuesday, following the news. In a statement, it said that being added to the list was clearly a mistake, saying it was not a military company or supplier. CATL also called the move a mistake, while there was no immediate response from the other entities named. Being added to the list doesn't mean Tencent or the other companies will face sanctions, but it's a blow to the firm's reputations and a warning to US companies about the dangers of engaging with them. The list is updated annually and now designates 134 firms in all. It's part of moves to highlight and restrict businesses that the DoD says pose a risk to national security. In 2021, phone maker Xiaomi was removed from the list after suing the US government.
Coming up, flying bears hit the ice during Hershey's annual teddy bear toss.
And New Orleans begins its carnival season with the Joan of Arc Parade. The event comes just days after a terrorist killed 14 people and injured dozens of others by ramming a truck. Stay tuned for that.
I'm Ilka. I live with my daughter and with my grandchildren. Holidays are important to me because they are all about family and laughter. I can remember just wondering where we were going to get a holiday meal. I wasn't always able to provide a turkey. My daughter and I work. It still just doesn't seem like there's enough to go around sometimes.
Every day, millions of our neighbors face hunger, including 1 in 5 children, and food costs keep rising. Please call or go online now and join Feeding America for $19 a month, just 63 cents a day. Together, thanks to a nationwide network of food banks, dedicated volunteers, and the monthly support of people like you, we can fill plates with the nutritious food everyone needs to thrive.
If you were over and playing with us, you were part of our family and you were going to eat. A real cook can take nothing and make something.
No one should ever have to wonder if they will have enough to eat, and our neighbors are working hard to feed their families this holiday season. Call or go online now. Visit helpfeedingamerica.org and give $19 a month. 98% of donations go directly to help millions of people facing hunger from coast to coast and in your own community. Use your credit card and you'll get this exclusive canvas grocery bag as a thank you for joining hands with people across America to help end hunger.
Some of the lessons that I hope that my family will take, it is important to treat people the way that you want to be treated. I have carried on the tradition of loving people through food.
Please call right now or go online to make a monthly gift at helpfeedingamerica.org. Your support helps our neighbors bring food home to their families.
I don't remember how it started. Our back and forth. Victory. Fumble. Repeat. It always came back.
Dad! Okay, here we go, throw it! Yeah.
You probably don't remember what you told me.
That was perfect.
But I heard every word.
Nice.
Welcome back. New Orleans began its carnival season with the Joan of Arc Parade yesterday, just days after a driver rammed a truck into a crowd. The terror attack killed 14 people and injured dozens more on New Year's Day. Crowds gathered on Bourbon Street to pay respects to the victims and celebrate the city's resilience. Memorials near the parade route included flowers and candles. Locals said honoring the dead means enjoying life despite the tragedy.
I think we have to honor people that left this world in such a tragic way as continuing to go forward. So that's one reason I'm here tonight.
The unfortunate events that occurred on New Year's here in New Orleans is not going to stop us from maintaining our traditions and our love for life.
The parade marks the start of Mardi Gras season and honors the birthday of Joan of Arc. The event featured performers, music, and the iconic Arc statue, symbolizing courage and renewal.
It was raining teddy bears in Hershey, Pennsylvania. That was during the Hershey Bears annual teddy bear toss at a hockey game on Sunday. More than 100,000 teddy bears and stuffed animals were collected during the event, breaking last year's record of 74,000. The popular tradition has fans throwing stuffed animals onto the ice after their team's first goal of the game. This year, that honor fell to forward Mike Scarbosa, who scored in the opening period in a game against the Providence Bruins. The Hershey Bears went on to win against the Bruins 5-1 in front of a sold-out crowd of over 10,000. The stuffed animals will be donated to over 35 local charities.
And coming up, lawmakers are set to pay tribute to former President Jimmy Carter at the U.S. Capitol, where he will lie in state for 3 days. We have that for you after this break.
What has lasted 5,000 years was once almost lost. Now, the world awaits the divine culture's return. Imagine a coffee that cares for your health. Expertly fermented with a 50 enzyme complex to enhance flavor and remove bitterness. Small batch roasted to a decadent medium dark, resulting in a brew that is gentle on digestion, low acid, and up to 90% less caffeine than regular coffee. Try America's first enzyme fermented coffee today.
Ethan was shot in the head in his best friend's house with an unsecured gun. The father, the gun owner, he stored his 3 guns and bullets in a shoebox. That has to be the most horrific experience that a human could ever have.
As the universe nears the end of its cycle of creation and destruction, the merciful King of Kings descends to save it, confronting the chaos sown by the malvolent Red Dragon. Earth becomes the ultimate battleground. Humanity faces a defining choice. Our eternal fate hangs in the balance during this pivotal moment of cosmic shift.
If you love them enough to crawl into a play place to get them to come down, then surely you'll check nhtsa.gov/the right seat to make sure they're in the right car seat.
Top of a new hour. Welcome to NTD Newsroom. I'm Fiona G.
And I'm Kevin Hogan.
Lawmakers are set to pay tribute to former President Jimmy Carter at the U.S. Capitol, where he will lie in state for 3 days.
A $20 billion foreign investment to build new data centers in the U.S. President-elect Trump welcoming the funding.
Facebook getting rid of fact checkers. CEO Mark Zuckerberg signals a cultural shift, prioritizing free speech while hindering censorship.
Auto manufacturers showcase some of their future plans at the first 2 days of CES 2024 in Las Vegas. Companies like Toyota are going beyond the road.
Over 100 people are reported dead in Tibet after a powerful earthquake struck the area. Why Tibet's government-in-exile blames the Chinese Communist Party for the earthquake.
This is NTD Newsroom, live from our global headquarters in New York City.
Former President Jimmy Carter will lie in state at the U.S. Capitol for 3 days, starting today.
That's right, and our Washington correspondent Luis Martinez is at the Capitol complex. Luis, good afternoon. What can we expect to see today in Washington, D.C.?
Of course, good afternoon, Fiona, Kevin. So right now, the last remains of former President Jimmy Carter already arrived at Joint Base Andrews and are making their way on a motorcade, a procession to the U.S. Navy Memorial. Earlier today, there was a brief ceremony at Joint Base Andrews to transfer the remain of former President Jimmy Carter from Air Force One. That was a Special Air Mission 39 in honor, of course, of the 39th president that flew from Atlanta, Georgia to Joint Base Andrews, transferred then the remains to a motorcade, and making its way right now to the U.S. Navy Memorial. There will be another short ceremony between 15 and 20 minutes. They will transfer the remains of the former president from a hearse into a caisson that will be pulled by a horse in a carriage in a second procession that will take place after a short ceremony at the U.S. Navy Memorial. We will see the flag of the graduating class from the Naval Academy 1946, where Jimmy Carter graduated, being flown, and we'll also see midshipmen lined up and hear the 21-gun salute. Now, after that procession on a caisson pulled by horse to the U.S. Capitol, former President Jimmy Carter will be lying in state at the Capitol Rotunda until Thursday. Later today, lawmakers will hold a service to commemorate, to honor Jimmy Carter. We'll hear eulogies from Speaker of the House Mike Johnson, Minority Leader Hakeem Jeffries, Senate Majority Leader John Thune, and Senate Minority Leader Chuck Schumer, but also Vice President Kamala Harris. Earlier today, we heard from Senate leadership from the Democratic and Republican Party some words and remarks on the late president. Let's listen.
Within 14 years, he had gone from taking up office in the Georgia State Senate to taking up office as President of the United States. His presidency was notable for a number of things, including his successful brokering of a peace agreement between Egypt and Israel, an agreement that stands to this day.
He was a gentleman in every sense of the word, kind, honorable, intelligent, humble, deeply patriotic. These are virtues he brought to the Oval Office in an era when trust in government was arguably at a low in the 20th century. He never stopped serving others until his final day. America was lucky to have him as a citizen, as a president, and as a moral compass of our time.
So, Kevin, Fiona, after the short service here at the Capitol Rotunda, the former President Jimmy Carter will be lying in state until Thursday morning, and the U.S. Capitol will be open to the public for those who wish to pay their respects to the late president. And on Thursday, the former president will be transferred from the U.S. Capitol to the Washington National Cathedral for his funeral service. All living former presidents are expected to attend, and the main eulogy will be delivered by current President Joe Biden. Back to you, Fiona. Kevin.
Louise, thank you for that report. Now, in a wide-ranging press conference, President-elect Trump reacted to the latest developments in his legal battles.
He also teases plans to take Greenland, the Panama Canal, and Canada as part of the U.S. NTD's White House correspondent Iris Tao brings us more from West Palm Beach.
Iris, good afternoon. What's the latest we're hearing from the president-elect?
Good afternoon to you both as well. So today's press conference was Trump's first public remarks after his election win was officially certified yesterday by Congress. And in this press conference, he talked about a variety of topics, including his upcoming foreign policy, the ongoing transition process, as well as what's been facing on the legal front. He talked about how the transition process, as opposed to what administration has promised, is actually not going smoothly. In particular, he criticized what he calls lawfare, and he says that they're still playing with the courts even until this day, and that was a quote by Mr. Trump. Specifically, he's talking about the ongoing cases, for example, in New York. The latest development today being that a New York appeals court has again denied Trump's request to delay his sentencing in the New York business record case, which was set for this upcoming Friday, just 10 days before his inauguration. And the Trump's team was trying to get the sentencing delayed, arguing that it would interfere with the ongoing presidential transition, adding that the case should be paused and nothing should proceed until the appeals court finishes reviewing the Trump's presidential immunity argument. But the latest development today, after Judge Juan Merchan already denied that request, was that the appeals court struck it down as well. Meanwhile, Trump did get a legal win in another case today, though, and Judge Eileen Cannon temporarily blocks a special counsel Jack Smith's release of his reports into his two investigations into President Trump. And Trump today reacting to the latest development during the press conference and adding that the report and the case itself was, quote, fake. Let's take a look.
And it'll be a fake report just like the investigation was a fake investigation because it was a fake case against a political opponent. They thought they were going to use this to beat me.
And Trump today again defending himself on all of these cases, saying, quote, I did absolutely nothing wrong, and quote, I won all these cases. Meanwhile, another major agenda on his press conference today that he was trying to tell the public was his upcoming foreign policy agenda. And Trump has been teasing, we know that his plans to, for example, to potentially incorporate the Panama Canal and Greenland into the U.S. for national security purpose. And he again doubled down on his plans today. In particular, he refused to commit to not using military force or economic coercion to get his plans complete. He says that, for example, the Panama Canal was built for the U.S. military, but is now operated by Chinese government. He adds that Greenland is needed as well for national security purpose, as there are Chinese ships all around. Here's what he said about it. Watch.
I'm not going to commit to that now. It might be that you'll have to do something. Look, the Panama Canal is vital to our country. It's being operated by China. China.
And he was also asked if he would also not commit to using military force or economic coercion to potentially make Canada the 51st state of the U.S. He says he will not use military force against Canada, but will try to use, for example, tariffs and economic measures to potentially make Canada part of the country already. He says it would be a great country if the two, U.S. and Canada, would be merged together. He also says that he would rename the Gulf of Mexico to the Gulf of America, saying that it incorporates a lot of territory. Meanwhile, on foreign wars, he also spoke about the Middle East situation today, saying that, again, warning that there will be hell in the Middle East if the hostages weren't returned back by the time he takes office. His envoy to the Middle East, Stephen Witkoff, was here today during the press conference, and he also said that he looks forward to potentially have some good news, good things to announce by the time Trump takes office in just about 2 weeks. Trump also talked about the Russia situation, saying that Putin wants to talk to him, but he will wait until after the inauguration, then when he becomes the actual president, to make that communication. He also, of course, talked about the ongoing situation and the wars, saying that he will try to bring peace to these countries. Back to you.
Certainly lots to digest there, Iris. Thank you for the update.
President-elect Trump has named his choice for a U.S. attorney for the Eastern District of New York, Joseph Nisala Jr. Trump wrote on Truth Social yesterday that Nocella has a strong record of ensuring law and order in New York. He said Nocella was an assistant U.S. attorney in that same district during the early 90s. Nocella is a Columbia Law School graduate and a judge in Nassau County. The district includes Nassau and Suffolk counties on Long Island, along with Kings County in Brooklyn, Richmond County on Staten Island, and Queens County. The current U.S. attorney for the district is set to resign on January 10th.
And on with the Trump administration, President-elect Trump's incoming chief of staff, Susie Wiles, has outlined her vision for a smooth second term. Wiles co-managed Trump's campaign. She promises a disciplined West Wing focused on teamwork and swiftly delivering on the president-elect's promises to voters. Wiles emphasized that success hinges on teamwork and shared goals. This all in an interview with Axios published yesterday. She made it clear that solo players seeking drama will not be part of the team. Wiles earned the nickname Ice Maiden for her efficient management of the campaign and unflappable demeanor. Wiles says Trump learned the hard way from his first-term setbacks. He now knows that having a team that is both competent and loyal is key to success. Donald Trump Jr. arrived in Greenland's capital this morning. He said his father, President-elect Trump, said hello to everyone in Greenland.
The visit comes as Trump continues to call for U.S. ownership of the Danish territory.
We're a little pressed for time because we only have a couple hours of daylight, so we got to see everything, but we're really excited to be here. Thank you guys so much. Just here as tourists, seeing it looks like an incredible place. We've been talking about going for a while. I was actually supposed to be here last spring for some of the stuff I do in my free time, but just really excited to be here. Awesome country. The scenery coming in was just spectacular, so just very excited to be here. Thank you.
Denmark's foreign ministry yesterday acknowledged the planned trip, but said it was not being called an official visit. In a Truth Social post, Trump Sr. said his son would travel to Greenland along with various representatives. He added that the people of the island off the Canadian coast will benefit if and when it becomes part of the U.S.
When Trump first floated the idea of purchasing Greenland from Denmark in December, the territory's prime minister said the island was not for sale and never will be. The prime minister has been pushing for Greenland's independence. In his New Year's speech, he said the island needs to break the shackles of colonialism.
The new chair of the House Foreign Affairs Committee plans to move a bill this week to sanction the ICC. Now that's the International Criminal Court. This comes after the ICC issued an arrest warrant for Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu. A congressional aide said the Foreign Affairs Chair, Brian Mast, could get a vote on the House floor by Thursday. The bill would sanction anyone working to prosecute American citizens or officials from U.S. allied nations, including Israel. It would also halt U.S. funding for the ICC. The Foreign Affairs Chair said the bill sends a clear message to the ICC, adding that the court has prolonged the war and prevented the release of American hostages. Over 100 people reported dead in Tibet after a powerful earthquake struck the area.
Tibet's government-in-exile blames the Chinese Communist Party for the many deaths. Here's what they're saying.
A strong earthquake struck the foothills of the Himalayas near one of Tibet's holiest cities on Tuesday. The quake killed at least 126 people and destroyed hundreds of houses, according to Chinese authorities. The magnitude 6.8 earthquake's epicenter was about 50 miles north of Mount Everest, the world's highest mountain. Tremors also shook buildings in neighboring Nepal, Bhutan, and India.
Hold China accountable for such an event that takes place.
A member of Tibet's parliament-in-exile says China is to blame for Tuesday's earthquake and the deaths that came with it.
One of the most important causes is the mining, excessive amount of natural resources mining that is taking place under the Chinese Communist Party.
She says China digs into Tibet's mountains to mine them without taking the necessary steps to preserve those mountains. The members of Tibet's parliament-in-exile are currently living in neighboring India. This comes after the Chinese Communist Party invaded Tibet in the 1950s.
Since the occupation of Tibet, China has been exploiting the natural resources. You will have more and more disaster that are all made by man, the Chinese wrong policy.
Rescue work is now underway. People are clearing through the rubble to see if they can find any survivors. The official number of casualties could become higher if more dead bodies are found.
The Guatemalan national accused of burning a sleeping woman to death inside a New York City subway car pleaded not guilty today to murder and arson charges. Prosecutors say Sebastian Zapata lit 57-year-old Debrina Kawam on fire at Brooklyn's Coney Island station back on December 22nd. The 33-year-old then allegedly fanned the flames with a shirt before sitting on a platform bench to watch her burn. The brutal murder is one of the latest instances of violent crime in the nation's largest mass transit system. On Christmas Eve, a man slashed 2 people in Manhattan's Grand Central subway station. Days later, another man survived being shoved onto subway tracks ahead of an oncoming train. Immigration authorities say Zapata entered the country illegally after being deported in 2018. 2 bodies were found in the landing gear compartment of a JetBlue aircraft at a South Florida airport.
Authorities gave an update today after the bodies were discovered in the wheel well area last night at the Fort Lauderdale International Airport.
I can share that the individuals who deceased are both males. Beyond that, their identities at this time are unknown. That is one of the questions that detectives are seeking to answer. Of course, if there's anyone who might have information regarding this incident and the circumstances leading up to it, Broward Sheriff's Office detectives would like to hear from them.
A JetBlue spokesperson said they were found during a routine post-flight maintenance inspection. The aircraft had arrived in Fort Lauderdale shortly after 11 p.m. from John F. Kennedy International Airport in New York. The names of the people or any other details have not yet been released.
The discovery comes just 2 weeks after a body was found in the wheel well of a United Airlines flight traveling from Chicago to Maui. An FAA report from 2011 says about 80% of stowaways who attempt to fly in a plane's wheel well die from freezing, a lack of oxygen, or being crushed by a plane's landing gear.
2 inmates on death row are rejecting clemency. They're among the 37 inmates whose sentences President Joe Biden commuted last month, sparing them from execution. Court documents reveal that Shannon Agofsky and Len Davis are both refusing to accept the clemency action and have filed an emergency motion to block the change. This is because if they accept, it would remove the heightened scrutiny that death penalty appeals receive. This is when courts examine cases closer for any errors. The inmates might not be able to restore their death sentences since the Supreme Court ruled that a president can grant reprieves and pardons without a convict's consent. Coming up, President Biden comments on Canadian Prime Minister Justin Trudeau's resignation.
He spoke about what he thought of the Canadian leader and on the U.S. relationship with Canada. Find out those details after this break.
I'm Amy Grant, and I want to talk to you from my heart about the heart. I would have been the last person on the list to say this woman has a problem with her heart. So no, there was nothing about my life that said, you have a ticking time bomb in your chest. But I did. I wound up in the office of a cardiologist because I was there with my husband. And at the tail end of that, the cardiologist looked at me and said, I want to see you. No one was more surprised than I was to learn I was living with a rare heart condition. He said, Amy, this condition, you'll be fine, and then catastrophic. A few months later, I had open heart surgery that saved my life. And I owe it to the research and life-saving medical breakthroughs developed by the American Heart Association. That's why I'm asking you to join me and become a monthly donor to the American Heart Association. Please call now or go to helpheart.org. For only $19 a month, just 63 cents a day, you can help fund the next medical breakthrough, get the next person trained in CPR, and get the next hospital certified in high-quality cardiovascular care. If this could happen to me, it could happen to anybody. Heart disease is America's #1 killer, but your support can save your life or the life of someone you love. Give $19 a month with your credit card and we'll send you this special t-shirt you can wear to show you're part of a community of monthly donors working to help save more lives like mine. I'm grateful for the American Heart Association. Their research gave me more time to do the things I love with the people I love. So listen to your heart. I'm here today because I did. Please call the number on your screen or go to helpheart.org now to become a monthly donor and help save even more lives. Thank you.
Every day, thousands of kids start vaping. And I can't let this happen to my kid. So if you want to talk to your kids, you have to get it trending.
No, you're doing it wrong.
Let's go.
Can we talk?
Yeah, what's up?
Visit talkaboutvaping.org for tips on when and how to have the vape talk.
Welcome back to Newsroom. President Biden released a statement after Canadian Prime Minister Justin Trudeau says that he'll be resigning.
Biden also traveled to California to announce another round of federal land protections. NTD's correspondent Jason Blair has the update.
Following a resignation announcement by Canadian Prime Minister Justin Trudeau, President Joe Biden says that the U.S. has no better ally than Canada. Biden says over the last decade, Prime Minister Trudeau has led with commitment, optimism, and strategic vision. The U.S.-Canada alliance is stronger because of him, the American and Canadian people are safer because of him, and the world is better off because of him. Trudeau said on Monday he will step down as Prime Minister once his party, the Liberal Party of Canada, has chosen a new leader. And a day after announcing a large area of offshore drilling bans, President Biden establishes hundreds of thousands of acres of land conservation in California. Today, Biden signed a proclamation to make the Chuckwalla and Satitla highlands into national monuments. This will protect and preserve 848,000 acres of federal land. The White House says that President Biden has now conserved more lands and waters than any president in history, with a total of 674 million acres protected during his presidency. A statement says, since taking office, President Biden has swiftly advanced the most ambitious conservation agenda in U.S. history, setting and pursuing a bold goal to conserve at least 30% of U.S. lands and waters by 2030. The Satitla Highlands National Monument is in Northern California and includes homelands of the Pitt River Tribe and Modoc people. It also includes a dormant volcano and has the longest known lava tube system in the world. The Chuckwalla National Monument is in Southern California and includes sacred sites of 5 groups of indigenous people and 50 rare species of plants and animals. Reporting in Washington, D.C., Jason Blair, NTD News.
Some Americans with medical debt could soon get a boost on their credit score. Leading up to his final days in office, President Biden is finalizing a rule that would end the addition of medical debt on credit reports. If Congress doesn't rescind the rule, about 15 million people will have an estimated $49 billion removed from their scores. That's according to the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau. The rule will also ban lenders from using medical devices like wheelchairs or prosthetic limbs as collateral for loans. They also cannot repossess them if patients are not able to repay those loans. Lenders can, however, continue to consider medical information when a person requests a loan to pay for health expenses or asks for a temporary postponement of loan payments for medical reasons. The rule will take effect 60 days after it is published in the Federal Register. At least 4 people have died in the winter storm that has gripped much of the nation.
Hundreds of thousands are without power, and nearly 2/3 of the U.S. is experiencing much lower temperatures than normal.
Record snowfall, roadways and airports shut, and nearly 200,000 customers without power. As the storm moves offshore, it left at least 4 people dead in its wake. Everett Carter was a 61-year-old public works employee in Missouri. He suffered a fatal injury while removing snow in Jackson County. Nathaniel Boyd and Whitney Almond of Kansas were killed in a vehicle crash. Officials say another person was found dead in front of a bus shelter in Houston, Texas. Several airports were temporarily closed, notably Ronald Reagan National Airport in Washington, D.C., and Kansas City International Airport. According to flight tracking website FlightAware, more than 2,300 flights were canceled across the country on Monday. Some parts of the U.S. received more snow than they had seen in over a decade. Kansas City and surrounding areas recorded more than 14 inches of snow. Louisville, Kentucky got its largest single-day snowfall in more than 25 years.
Oh, couldn't be worse.
The National Weather Service said the city set a one-day record for January 5th with 9 inches of snow. Authorities say dispatchers received more than 1,000 calls from drivers stranded on icy roads. A chilling video out of Kansas City, Missouri, shows a driver bailing out of his car after hitting black ice. The East Coast was also badly hit. Parts of New York State recorded over 6 feet of snow. Residents across Virginia, North Carolina, Maryland, Delaware, Pennsylvania, and New Jersey remained under winter alerts even as snow began to taper further inland. Meanwhile, another winter storm is headed for the south and mid-Atlantic. Forecasters say it will develop over the southern plains Thursday, bringing rain and snow to Oklahoma, Texas, and Arkansas before moving east.
Forecasters warn Southern California could see a life-threatening and destructive windstorm this week. Powerful gusts and dropped humidity levels raise the risk for wildfires in parched areas that are still recovering from a recent destructive blaze. The National Weather Service says gusts could reach 80 miles per hour across much of Los Angeles and Ventura counties. Isolated gusts could top 100 miles per hour in the mountains and the foothills. The Weather Service warned of downed trees, dangerous conditions off the coast, and potential delays at local airports. Gusts blowing across tinder-dry vegetation could create extreme fire conditions in some areas, including the charred footprint of last month's wind-driven Franklin fire. Now, that fire damaged or destroyed 48 structures and scorched more than 1 million acres in the Golden State last year.
Facebook getting rid of fact-checkers. CEO Mark Zuckerberg signals a cultural shift, prioritizing free speech and hampering censorship. Here's the story.
We're going to get rid of fact-checkers.
Meta CEO Mark Zuckerberg signaling a cultural shift at Facebook and Instagram, saying it's time to get back to their roots around free expression.
Fact-checkers have just been too politically biased and have destroyed more trust than they've created. The recent elections also feel like a cultural tipping point towards once again prioritizing speech.
Zuckerberg says he wants to work with incoming President Donald Trump to fight censorship and replace fact-checkers with community notes, like the ones on X.
Do I think they'd be doing this if the Biden administration had won a second round? No.
Media expert Shema Hyder says Zuckerberg knows the platforms have to change because of the incoming administration. Also, she says it's because the fact-checking has been very bad.
So this is not a good product. And in fact, you can see that because if you look across the board and what people often saw in their feeds did not line up with reality.
Meta is also moving content moderation teams from California to Texas to reduce the appearance of bias. And they will bring back political content.
It's absolutely a no-brainer if Facebook, Meta, whatever you want to call it, wants to continue to be relevant in this free speech platform. I think we've seen things change.
Media professional Greg Linnelli says the trends are changing, particularly with both Musk and Trump coming in.
And CES 2025, formerly known as the Consumer Electronics Show, used to debut products ranging from new automotive technology to quirky gadgets and new computer-related technology. NTD's Sean Marshall has some updates on what the auto industry has showcased so far.
The CES show is often where the auto industry debuts a number of ideas and plans. Toyota, for instance, unveiled plans for wheelchair race cars, futuristic cities, and said it will invest in Japanese startup Interstellar Technologies to support mass production of its rockets.
Because when it comes to what's possible when we work together, the sky is the limit. And speaking of the sky, we are exploring rockets too. Because the future of mobility shouldn't be limited to just Earth or just one car company for that matter.
Toyota is also building a lunar rover with Japan's space agency that can carry astronauts on the moon's surface for the NASA-led Artemis program. Also teaming up with Toyota is NVIDIA. Toyota Motor will use NVIDIA's Orin chips and automotive operating system to power advanced driver assistance in several models. It did not give details about the models. NVIDIA CEO Jensen Huang expects automotive hardware and software revenue to reach $5 billion in fiscal 2026, up from an expected $4 billion this year. After a couple of years of being a hot topic at CES in Las Vegas, Sony's Afeela A1 electric vehicle, developed in partnership with Honda, is now available for pre-order.
This product will be offered at the starting price of $89,900 for the origin trim and $102,900 for the signature trim. Both include a 3-year complimentary subscription to certain functionality and features.
The 3-year complimentary subscription is to Sony's advanced in-car connectivity and entertainment features, including driver assistance systems. CES 2025 runs January 7th to the 10th. Sean Marshall, NTD News.
The U.S. is rolling out a consumer labeling system designed to help Americans pick smart devices that are less vulnerable to hacking. Amazon, Best Buy, Google, LG, and Samsung are among industry participants. Under the U.S. Cyber Trust Mark Initiative, manufacturers can affix the label on their products if they meet federal cybersecurity standards. The types of devices that can seek to carry the label include baby monitors, home security cameras, fitness trackers, and other devices. The labels will include a distinctive shield logo as well as QR codes that consumers can scan for more information. Products bearing the label should be available this year once manufacturers begin submitting their devices for approval. Participation is voluntary. McDonald's is flipping on its diversity, equity, and inclusion policies. The company sent out an email to restaurant owners, operators, employers, and suppliers. The fast food chain said it would retire its practice of aspirational representation goals. It is also doing away with a pledge to hire a diverse group of suppliers. McDonald's is also renaming its diversity team the Global Inclusion Team. The company said it reassessed its DEI policies after the Supreme Court ruled against race-conscious admission programs at universities in 2023. McDonald's noted that the legal landscape had shifted and other companies were reevaluating their DEI initiatives.
The first American to contract a severe case of the bird flu has died. NTD's Daniel Monahan has more on the case and government recommendations to stay safe.
The Louisiana Department of Health confirmed the death on Monday. Authorities say the patient was over 65 years old and reportedly had underlying medical conditions. The individual was hospitalized with the flu after an exposure to a flock of birds.
We do have this happening all the time. We do have migratory birds moving from different parts of the country. We sometimes have them infected with bird flu viruses, and they can spread to local birds or to backyard flocks.
The state recommends that people be careful around sick and dead animals, their droppings, and any contact with them.
And not eating undercooked poultry or eggs or milk, consuming milk that hasn't been pasteurized.
No other person linked to the deceased patient has become ill. Officials say the patient had a strain of bird flu that is currently circulating in wild birds and poultry. The strain is different from a variant that has appeared in dairy cattle. Just last week, the National Institutes of Health called for more action to tackle bird flu. So far, several dozen Americans have contracted the virus. Health officials have stressed that bird flu is still mainly an animal health issue and that the risk to the public remains low. No spread of the virus from person to person has been documented in the United States or elsewhere. Daniel Monahan, NTD News.
Coming up, an investigator in the United Kingdom calls for action to defeat grooming gangs. Find out more about this criminal network and why she thinks now is the time to tackle the issue when we come back.
Just like all of you, I had problems sleeping. I had tried every pillow out there and nothing worked. I'd flip-flop all night, use my arm for support, and fall asleep, or I'd wake up with a sore neck or maybe a headache. Well, quality sleep comes from keeping your neck straight at night. You have to fill in that space between your head and your bed. That's why I invented MyPillow. MyPillow's patented fill adjusts to your exact individual needs, and it doesn't matter if you sleep on your back, stomach, side, or any combination of all three.
When I got MyPillow, I'm asleep almost immediately. I stay asleep at night, and I wake up more well-rested in the morning.
So go to MyPillow.com or call the number on your screen. Use your promo code to get Classic King MyPillows for only $19.98. Queen size just $18.98. Standard Classic MyPillows only $14.98. That's right, only $14.98. Plus all orders $75 or more ship absolutely free.
Tangazo hili linahusu njaa. Tarajia kuona watoto wakiwa na njaa katika maeneo haya. Mambo yalikuwa bora kwa miaka mingi. Tuliweza kupigana na njaa na watoto wachache walikufa. Lakini sasa mambo yamebadilika na kwa mabaya zaidi. Hii ni kwa sababu wakati huu ukame umeangamiza zaidi.
Через війни та конфлікти ми мусимо залишати наші домівки і всі наші речі. Ми навіть не маємо їжі. Тому нам потрібна ваша допомога.
Millions of children are fighting to survive due to inequality, conflict, poverty, and the climate crisis. Save the Children is working alongside communities to provide a better life for children. And there's a way you can help. Please call or go online to give just $10 a month. Only 33 cents a day. We urgently need 1,000 new monthly donors in the next 30 days to help the children we support around the world. You can help provide food, medicine, care, and protection, plus so much more that a child needs, by calling right now and giving just $10 a month.
Ви можете допомогти голодуючим родинам вижити.
All we need are 1,000 monthly donors in the next 30 days. Please call or go online now with your monthly gift of just $10. Thanks to generous government grants, every dollar you give can have up to 10 times the impact. And when you call with your credit card, we will send you this Save the Children tote bag as a thank you for your support.
Toto kote duniani
потребують вашої допомоги.
Your small monthly donation of just $10 could be the reason a child in crisis survives. Please call or go online to givetosave.org to help save lives.
Over now to Britain, where an investigator is urging action to tackle child grooming gangs and dismissing calls for further inquiries.
This comes amid an ongoing and heated debate over the issue between Elon Musk and Britain's Prime Minister. NTD's international correspondent Malcolm Hudson has more from London.
Alexis J., the lady behind Britain's independent inquiry into child sexual abuse, has called for urgent action rather than further inquiries into Britain's grooming gang scandal. This as political tensions over the scandal continue to grow. The grooming gang scandal revealed how gangs of mostly Pakistani men had groomed, trafficked and raped young white girls across numerous towns in Britain over decades. It returned to the political agenda following an ongoing row between Elon Musk and British Prime Minister Keir Starmer. Jay was the head of a 7-year inquiry published in October 2022 after reviewing evidence from 7,000 individuals.
Locally, people need to step up to the mark and do the sorts of things that have been recommended. I think there's something like 400 recommendations that we identified through a national charity in all the reviews that had already been carried out, and many of those were simply not met.
The row between Musk and Starmer has seen Musk claim Starmer failed to tackle the scandal when he was the UK's lead prosecutor. Starmer has defended his record, saying he tackled the gangs head-on. Though Jay said the row distracts from the issues, she also said she is pleased that the scandal and her recommendations were getting attention, and acknowledged the row may have given the government a push to act. Shadow Justice Secretary Robert Jenrick told the BBC that a lot has been learned from past reviews into grooming gangs and child abuse, but added recent revelations show a much bigger scale.
The J review, for example, looked at 6 towns. We now suspect that at least 50 towns have had grooming gangs of this kind. And so it's right that we have a full national inquiry.
He said a national inquiry would ensure victims have justice, it would help prevent other vulnerable girls from going through the same abuse, and it would hold officials who allegedly covered up the abuse to account. On Monday, Home Secretary Yvette Cooper said it's time for action, not more inquiries, and said the government will implement recommendations from past reviews.
First, I can confirm we will make it mandatory to report abuse. Second, we'll also legislate to make grooming an aggravating factor in the sentencing of child sexual offences. And third, we will overhaul the information and evidence that is gathered on child sexual abuse and exploitation and embed it in a clear new performance framework for policing.
She also committed to setting out more details about other recommendations in the future as well. Malcolm Hudson, NTD News, London.
And on to France now, where farmers are trying to revive a protest movement by blocking access to Paris. Police stopped them before reaching the capital and prevented the demonstrations. NTD's international correspondent David Vives spoke with a farmers' union representative. Take a look.
Around 200 French farmers staged protests near Paris on Monday against the EU-Mercosur trade deal. They demand better pay and protection for small farmers who feel threatened by the agreement. The demonstrations were led by Coordination Rurale, France's second-largest farmers' union.
Qui est autorisé dans les autres pays européens soit autorisé chez nous.
We know less than 10% of products imported in Europe are up to EU standards. So we are calling for EU authorities to better monitor the quality of the products. Also, the standards should be the same for every farmer in Europe, which is not the case now.
Convoys of tractors and cars set out early Monday with the goal of reaching Paris. Police blocked their entry into the capital, citing bans on unauthorized gatherings. Some farmers forced their way through police blockades and managed to reach the capital.
We don't understand why police seem to harass us so much. We have been blocked and we've been given fines again and again. We can add them up in piles, actually. Some farmers went to Champs-Élysées in Paris just to show up, and they were fined too.
1 year after massive farmers' protests swept across Europe, some unions claim little has improved. Converse says he hopes that the new government will enforce measures to support farmers. Otherwise, more protests could be planned in the coming weeks. David Vives, NTD News, Paris.
The U.S. Department of Defense has added gaming giant Tencent to a list of firms allegedly aiding China's military. It also added firms including battery maker CATL and China's largest shipping company, Costco. Here's a closer look.
Tencent shares fell over 7% in Hong Kong trade on Tuesday, following the news. In a statement, it said that being added to the list was clearly a mistake, saying it was not a military company or supplier. CATL also called the move a mistake, while there was no immediate response from the other entities named. Being added to the list doesn't mean Tencent or the other companies will face sanctions, but it's a blow to the firm's reputations and a warning to US companies about the dangers of engaging with them. The list is updated annually and now designates 134 firms in all. It's part of moves to highlight and restrict businesses that the DoD says pose a risk to national security. In 2021, phone maker Xiaomi was removed from the list after suing the US government.
Taiwanese authorities accused a Chinese ship of damaging an undersea cable connected to the island last week. The damaged cable is part of the subsea internet cable system connecting Taiwan with the west coast of the U.S. The cable's Taiwan operator said service was immediately restored after it decided to run data through other cables.
Taiwanese authorities said they have asked the ship's next destination, South Korea, to help investigate the matter. The Chinese cargo ship is named Shunxing 39, according to satellite images and other maritime databases. The vessel's sailing route was very chaotic as it passed by Taiwan's north shore. Critical undersea cables are embedded in seabeds beneath those waters, including the one that suffered damage. That specific cable is part of the Trans-Pacific Express Cable System, a piece of critical communications infrastructure. It connects the U.S. and Taiwan, as well as the east coast of China, Japan, and South Korea. Authorities say the location where the Chinese ship dragged its anchor coincided with the damage to the cable. According to the Financial Times, the ship is owned by a company registered in Hong Kong. It was allegedly directed by a person from mainland China, despite the ship flying the flag of Cameroon. The Taiwanese government said the incident was unlikely to be an innocent accident. The incident comes only 2 months after NATO countries accused China of sabotaging their undersea cables.
Back in the States, New Yorkers now have to pay to drive into parts of Manhattan under a new congestion pricing plan. Commuters from outer boroughs and a local resident reacted to the new tolls.
It affects everybody because we have to come in every day. We take the bridge every day, which charges $9, and half my workers come the same thing. It affects everybody. And it really is too much for everyone.
More money for the company, more expensive for the customers. And there's a big problem for everybody.
We have an interest to solve congestion. We have an interest to invest in mass transit. So I do think this is worth trying and testing out.
A lot of people who work in downtown or some other places, they have to, or some people who travel from Connecticut or Staten Island or any Pennsylvania. So they had to take a car to come. And now they have to pay for 5 days extra money, those working days. I think it's not fair.
And when we come back from the break, former President Jimmy Carter will be lying in state at the U.S. Capitol for 3 days starting today.
We bring you special coverage of that in just a moment.
Shenyun Creations, the streaming platform from Shenyun, featuring world-class dance, past programs, and all original music. Masterclasses, behind the scenes, comedy, and more. Explore shenyuncreations.com.
The annual clearance event is going on now at Mathis Home with doorbuster prices in every department. Shop hundreds of sofas in all the latest styles and get huge discounts. Get closeout prices on bedroom and dining furniture, or choose from a huge assortment of recliners from all the top brands. Plus, they're all in stock, so you can take it home today with our fast and easy financing. Come save at the annual clearance event at your furniture superstore, Mathis Home.
Hi, I'm Susan Lucci. I never thought about heart disease until I had my own heart event. I received 2 stents in my arteries, stents developed through research funded by the American Heart Association. Those stents saved my life. I have met so many survivors. Each of them tells a story that can be so helpful to women out there.
Everything was pretty good. It was a very happy life. I was given the diagnosis that I had peripartum cardiomyopathy, which is basically a pregnancy-induced heart failure. They told me my only chance was a heart transplant.
And the American Heart Association helped make that possible. Their research helped save me.
I think everyone should support the American Heart Association. Call now or go to helpheart.org. For only $19 a month, just 63 cents a day, you can help fund the next medical breakthrough. Get the next person trained in CPR, the next hospital certified in high-quality cardiovascular care. You can be part of that very important work that the American Heart Association is doing to save lives everywhere. Give $19 a month with your credit card, and we'll send you this special t-shirt that you can wear to show that you are helping save lives.
I'm grateful for just every day that I get with my children. I am very thankful for the American Heart Association.
Heart disease is America's #1 killer, and your support now can help save your life or the life of someone you love. Listen to your heart. The only reason I'm here today is because I did. So please call the number on your screen or go to helpheart.org now. Join me as a monthly donor today and help save even more lives.
From a small-town Georgia peanut farmer to President of the United States,
I, Jimmy Carter.
Jimmy Carter aspired to make government competent and compassionate.
Our social and political progress has been based on one fundamental principle: the value and importance of the individual.
After 7 years as a naval officer, he returned home to Plains, Georgia, before entering into politics, eventually being elected governor of Georgia, using the platform to speak out against racism.
I say to you quite frankly that the time for racial discrimination is over.
Becoming president in 1977, his achievements were notable, including the Camp David Peace Accords in 1978, the framework for peace between Israel and Egypt. But there were dark days too, including the Iran hostage crisis that, together with the continuing inflation at home and an energy shortage, contributed to Ronald Reagan's landslide victory in 1980. Jimmy and his wife Rosalind founded the Carter Center in 1982, promoting peace, democracy, human rights, and economic and social development all over the world. In 2002, his work earned him the Nobel Peace Prize. A devout Christian, his life was largely defined by his faith and service to others. He spent decades teaching Sunday school in the small town where he was raised and volunteering with Habitat for Humanity. The longest-lived president in American history.
I love you!
Leaves behind a legacy of love. Married 77 years before his beloved Rosalind's passing in November 2023, calling their marriage the pinnacle of his life.
Well, the best thing I ever did was marrying Rosalind.
And now we are going to go to a live feed of the services honoring late U.S. President Jimmy Carter. Carter's body will be lying in state at the U.S. Capitol this week. He joins an exclusive list of those who have had the distinct and rare honor.
The funeral procession is about to leave the Navy Memorial Building, heading towards the U.S. Capitol building. A private ceremony inside the Capitol building's rotunda begins at 4:30 p.m. Eastern. The rotunda sits in between the House and Senate sides of the Capitol. The round-shaped area consists of iconic paintings like the signing of the Declaration of Independence, the British surrendering in the Revolutionary War, and George Washington resigning his military commission.
During the ceremony, speeches will be given to commemorate the 39th president, who died on December 29th at the age of 100. The congressional tribute will be given by House Speaker Mike Johnson and Senate Majority Leader John Thune. Vice President Kamala Harris will deliver one of the eulogies for Carter. And joining us in studio today to talk about the legacy of the late president is Raj Goyal, Democratic strategist and former Kansas State Representative. Raj, thank you so much for joining us.
Thanks for having me.
Yes, Raj, so you personally know President Carter and even his grandsons. Can you tell a little bit more about his character?
An incredible person, and I did go to college with Jason Carter, who's the chairman of the Carter Center now, and President Carter's grandson, and did have the privilege and honor to meet President Carter on a few occasions. And I will say, as a personal note, as a person who's been involved in Democratic politics for over 30 years, I had a Jimmy Carter for President poster on my wall. I think I was a rare Indian American in Kansas who did that. And so a lot of us, I think, throughout the country, and particularly those of us who are engaged in politics, admired, revered Jimmy Carter. And, you know, when I came up through politics, it was really more about his post-presidency, about what he did at the Carter Center. And I think it's that melding and fusing of not only of his political leadership, of being a progressive governor as a white man in the South, particularly in the time when he was getting elected in the 60s and the 70s, of course, but also the post-presidency. That's a through line. And I think a lot of people in political life today, they want to separate it. They want to say, oh, the presidency didn't end so well. He was repudiated by the electorate, and then he went off onto this post-presidency. But I actually reject that separation. It's a through line in the way that he treats public service. And in that clip that was shown about the individual and about how actually our society and people should be treated, that is the legacy of Jimmy Carter, and he's really a sample set of one. It's not just his age and his longevity, it's what he did. And I have to say, in this day and age of both parties, what we would give for a person of Jimmy Carter's integrity. I mean, he was a nuclear engineer. He helped fix a nuclear crisis in Canada, married to Rosalind for 77 years. Just an incredible person. And I think actually history will treat his presidency much better than actually contemporary politics did. And as a lifelong Democrat and somebody active in the party, I couldn't be more proud and actually sad to lose a great man.
It is amazing, and he was even able to get a nuclear sub-program off the ground, or to develop something like that is really incredible. In addition to everything else he did.
Absolutely, and I think one thing that hasn't gone remarked on enough is that he left the presidency and he never gave a corporate speech. You know, one thing they said was that Jimmy Carter was asked, how come you write so many books? He goes, I got to pay my bills. You know, he taught Sunday school. He ran the Carter Center. It was a complete nonprofit. You know, he didn't use public service as a path to personal riches, which is something that we now think of as commonplace, which I think a lot of us lament. And, you know, the election that he lost in 1980, let's not sugarcoat it. It was a decisive loss, and the Reagan era started. We're now 44 years into this sort of age of Reagan, you might even call it, and Donald Trump, in a way, is a direct descendant. He became famous, Donald Trump, during the age of Reagan in the 80s. And I have to say, I think a lot of us would probably look at it, regardless of who you voted for in this last election, and wonder, my gosh, maybe if we had taken a different fork in the road around how we treat our politics and what we think of as public service. It's really not a path to a personal bank account. It should be around public service. And I don't think Jimmy Carter could be any better an example for anybody, regardless of your party, of how you live that kind of life.
That is a great introduction from you, Representative Goyle. Thank you, because he's such an important figure in American politics.
Well, and I'm so glad you're covering it, and it's obviously a very, very big loss for the country. And one thing I have to say, you know, my friend Jason was speaking at the Carter Center, and you know, and he said, you know, it's funny what you can cram into 100 years of life. So you know, he was joking, but it's an amazing set of accomplishments to eliminate disease. You know, to bring peace treaties, to be an honest public servant, and if you'll let me, one other personal anecdote. He was the commencement speaker at my college graduation, thanks to Jason. And I was sitting there, and I might have been a little bit hungover that day. It was college graduation, but something he said that hit me like a thunderbolt. He was talking about, this is 1997, it's May, you know, there's really no mortal threat to America, the budget is balanced, you know, it's kind of a good time in America. And he's talking about the things that we need to do to become a transcendent country. So he always had this eye on the prize, this kind of shining city on the hill about what can we do to make America better? You know, how can we treat our poor? How can we treat our less well-off better? We're not going to just rest on our laurels and get rich and fat and happy. That's great that we're materially successful, but the measure of our country is how we treat everybody. That's the ultimate democracy. And I think Jimmy Carter was a sample set of one talking about that.
Yeah, I think whether you're talking about his presidency or his post-presidential life, a word that comes up a lot, and even President Joe Biden mentioned it, it's decency.
Absolutely. Yes, I mean, as I said earlier, what we would give now, even if people nowadays might not support Jimmy Carter's policies, I think as a person, I think it would be an overwhelming majority that would like to have someone like him, you know, be emblematic of our public servants now. I don't think it's a big controversy to say that our politics have become more coarse. Our politics have become more about the bottom line, you know, less about public service, and Jimmy Carter was really almost a throwback if you look at our era today.
Yes, Representative Goyle, we want to hear more from you. Now, what you're looking at is a bump shot of the Capitol building. The horse-drawn caisson is carrying the remains of 39th President Jimmy Carter down to what appears to be either Pennsylvania or Constitution Avenue, if they've made that turn yet. And they're heading to the Capitol Rotunda, where he is going to lie in state. And this is a man who championed human rights. He won a Nobel Peace Prize for that, and he was very well known for this. That's basically one of the centerpieces of his presidency.
Oh, I mean, and again, I like to think of it as a through line. People just don't change on a dime. You know, when he became a relatively young ex-president, he wanted to continue the same values, and that's what he did in establishing the Carter Center. And really, that model, the modern post-presidency, was created by Jimmy Carter. And I have to say, as a Democrat, I'm very proud of that, in the same way that Franklin Roosevelt really ushered in the modern era of presidential archives and presidential libraries, and so on. So, you know, the Nobel Peace Prize was very fitting in a sense. We were surprised he didn't get it actually earlier, but it's amazing. I mean, all of these diseases conquered, so much election monitoring around the world, And of course, I mean, how many, we have especially in New York City here, we have a housing crisis. And I think Jimmy and Rosalind probably did their level-headed best to just build a lot of houses directly for themselves. So, really ahead of their time in so many ways.
And it was through the Carter Center that he was able to expand his influence in promoting human rights and so forth. And that was one of the reasons why he was able to get that Nobel Peace Prize later on, like you said. That's 2002, several years after he left the White House.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. And one of the things about Jimmy Carter, I think that's also not as well understood is what a tough political pragmatist he was. And so, people in political life have forgotten that he was primaried by Ted Kennedy. And the 1980 primary challenge really did weaken him in the general election. And really the aftermath of that primary was felt in the 1984 primary, the 1988 primary, and it paved the way for the fact that we as Democrats, after 12 years in the wilderness of Reagan-Bush, were desperate to get that White House back, and Bill Clinton understood that. And Bill Clinton was obviously a very good candidate, and that's why after that bruising primary, the party came together because they realized that the divisiveness that really started in that 1980 primary challenge to Jimmy Carter, which he beat back by Ted Kennedy, we need to move beyond that if we wanted to win the White House again. So Jimmy Carter was an absolutely pivotal figure, even politically. And of course, after Watergate, you really couldn't have a starker contrast to really abject criminal conduct in the heart of the White House. I mean, a little bit history has sanded Richard Nixon's nefarious behavior, but it was an outright criminal conspiracy. Watergate was, and obviously the vice president previously resigned for his own corruption. So it was very important that someone like Jimmy Carter come onto the scene and really restore a sense of what democratic governance looked like.
And I think his political philosophy was very clear even before he went to the White House, right? Even in his inauguration speech as governor, he said, time for racial discrimination is over. And I think that really set the tone for a lot of the policies and perspectives he was going to bring to his leadership in the future. Absolutely.
His biographer, Jonathan Alter, who's a well-known writer and pundit, I think, said this, that Jimmy Carter really had a foot in 3 different centuries. He was raised, he was born in the 1920s, so he actually had a connection through his parents and, of course, to the 1800s. And then, of course, an incredible 20th century life and then a very robust 21st century life. And so his views on race and what he experienced directly, his father actually was in a black part of town. And I think it's written about that his mother was an incredible influence on him and who was an incredible force for racial reconciliation, doing things unthinkable in the 30s and in the 40s and in 50s in the Deep South. And so that shaped him and formed him, and that's why even though he had to make certain compromises to become the highest elected official in the state of Georgia, the cradle of the Confederacy, when he became governor, he took the political heat to move racial reconciliation. The motto of Atlanta was the city too busy to hate, because it was all about economic might. And if you visit Atlanta lately, it's incredible. The Civil and Human Rights Museum, the Carter Center, the Civil Rights Trail. The story of Georgia is really the story of America. And Jimmy Carter is an absolutely pivotal figure in that transition to what we think of as the modern South now.
Representative Goyle, this is all really great information. We want to unpack more of Jimmy Carter's presidency with you. Right now, we're going to head to a short break as this very dignified procession proceeds. And thank you for staying with us. Just in a moment, we're going to return with our special coverage of Jimmy Carter's Capitol Rotunda service in just the next hour.
Stay with us.
The Chinese Communist Party is exposing its hand. The fingerprints can be found all over. And I recently caught wind of these CCP operations on full display in South Korea. The top 13 theaters all rejected Shen Yun almost simultaneously. What makes the case in South Korea so different? And how does the CCP extend its influence into other countries? Now, for the Chinese Communist Party, this is warfare. war being waged here isn't being done through tanks and bombs, but instead through the invisible forces of culture and ideology. They also revealed a hidden war.
I go by Jackie. I'm 44 years old. I had 3 kids at the time and single mother. I was working 60 hours a week, still couldn't pay the bills, skip meals so that they could eat. It's been hard because one thing falls into place, 10 things fall out of place. You know, I just can't do this alone and make it work.
1 in 5 children face hunger in America, and food costs are rising. But everyone needs nourishing food to thrive, and they can when we work together so our neighbors can feed their families. Call or go online right now to join Feeding America with your gift of just $19 a month, only 63 cents a day. Together, thanks to a nationwide network of food banks, dedicated volunteers, and the monthly support of people like you, we can fill plates with nutritious food for families across America.
One day my mother came over to my house and said, "There's a meeting at the pantry." I said, "Okay," and I went. There were some ladies in there. They were from the food bank. They asked several questions. Some of those were about me and my story, but it helped me to open up a little bit.
We're getting closer to the day when no one in America faces hunger, but we can't do it without you. Call or go online now. Visit helpfeedingamerica.org and give $19 a month, just 63 cents a day. 98% of donations go directly to help millions of people facing hunger, from coast to coast and in your own community. And when you give by credit card, we'll send you this exclusive canvas grocery bag to show you are a part of a movement of supporters working together to help end hunger.
I have people that I can trust. I have hope.
Please call now or make your monthly donation at helpfeedingamerica.org, and your gift can double in impact.
Former U.S. President and Nobel Peace Prize winner Jimmy Carter has died at the age of 100. He was born on October 1st, 1924, and was one of 4 children of a farmer and a shopkeeper. He graduated from the U.S. Naval Academy in 1946 and served in the nuclear submarine program, but left to manage his family peanut farming business. He married his wife Rosalind in 1946, a union he called, quote, "the most important thing in my life." Together, they had 3 sons and a daughter. Carter had been a centrist as governor of Georgia with populist tendencies when he moved into the White House as the 39th U.S. president.
I, Jimmy Carter, do solemnly swear
that I will faithfully execute the office of President of the United States.
He served from January 1977 to January 1981. His one-term presidency was marked by the 1978 Camp David Accords between Israel and Egypt, bringing some stability to the Middle East. But it was also dogged by an economy in recession, persistent unpopularity, and the Iran hostage crisis that consumed his final 444 days in office. He was swept from office in an electoral landslide in 1980 as voters embraced Republican challenger Ronald Reagan. Despite a difficult time in office, he was a highly active and accomplished former president. He worked for decades on humanitarian causes and was awarded a Nobel Peace Prize in 2002 for his efforts to promote human rights and resolve conflicts around the world. In recent years, he had experienced several health issues, including melanoma that spread to his liver and brain. He died at his home in Plains, Georgia on Sunday, according to the Carter Center. Carter lived longer after his term in office than any other U.S. president. Along the way, he earned a reputation as a better former president than he was a president, a status he readily acknowledged.
And thank you for staying with us as we have our live special coverage of the funeral proceedings for late President Jimmy Carter in Washington, D.C. We are now joined by NTD's Washington correspondent Louise Martinez at Capitol Hill. Louise, what's the latest that you've got?
Well, as you are watching on screen, we are seeing the procession of former President Jimmy Carter's last remains being pulled by on a carriage on a Cassian, making its way from the U.S. Navy Memorial to the Capitol Rotunda, where he will be lying in state for the next 3 days. As soon as he arrives, his body, the casket, will be guarded by 6 members from each branch of the U.S. military, and then lawmakers will hold a service to honor the former president at the Capitol Rotunda. We will hear from Vice President Kamala Harris delivering a eulogy, but also from congressional leaders of both parties and both chambers. We'll have Senate Majority Leader John Thune and Senate Minority Leader Chuck Schumer, and also Speaker of the House Mike Johnson and Minority Leader Hakeem Jeffries deliver remarks. And after 8 p.m., the U.S. Capitol Rotunda will be open to the public for those who wish to pay their respects to the former president before he is transferred on Thursday morning to the Washington National Cathedral for his final funeral, state funeral service. On Thursday, we expect to hear a eulogy from current President Joe Biden, and all living former presidents are expected to attend. We know that while he was in Georgia, more than 20,000 people went to pay their respects to the former president, so we also expect long lines to be forming outside of the U.S. Capitol from tonight until Thursday, where, as I mentioned, will be transferred to the Washington National Cathedral. So right now, we're just waiting for his casket to arrive at the Capitol Rotunda, and of course for that service with lawmakers. And it will be also a private moment for family members and staffers who served during his time at the governorship in Georgia and at the White House here at the Capitol Rotunda. Back to you.
Louise Martinez, thank you for the report. Keep us updated. And now we are going to come back into studio to talk with our guest, Raj Goyal. Getting right back into...
Yes, we were talking about your connections to President Jimmy Carter at the Carter Center as well. Raj Goyal, he is a political strategist as well as a former Kansas state representative. So we're very glad to have you here on this important day for the nation. We were just talking about Carter's stance against racial segregation. For example, he was the first president to stand up to South Africa's apartheid system.
Oh, and I feel a personal connection to that, Kevin, because I lived in South Africa and worked on the Truth Commission for 3 to 4 months. Actually, I met my wife there. And in fact, President Carter's grandson, Jason, who I went to college with and blessed to count as a good friend, he lived in South Africa and for 2 years wrote a great book about South Africa. So the Carter family story in South Africa is very deep and long. And, you know, he was an absolute, really just a troubadour for peace and justice. And, you know, in the South, as we were saying before the break, you know, he was very important with the relationship with Daddy King, with Martin Luther King's father. Obviously, Martin Luther King tragically killed at age 39, but his father outlived him, and his father was a very well-known pastor, Daddy King, as he was known. And so Jimmy Carter was really just a fascinating figure in pioneering the civil rights struggle. I mean, remember, he got elected governor in the heart of the civil rights movement. And so it's amazing that he even obviously lived this long, but his connectivity to pivotal moments in American history also can't be overstated. I mean, he was in the most important crucible of the 20th century in America, which is the movement for black rights and to end American apartheid. Jimmy Carter was right on the front lines of it. And so it is, of course, an important through line to his fight for human rights in South Africa and around the world. And so, in fact, when you go to Atlanta, it's an amazing museum. It's called the Civil and Human Rights Museum. And I think of all American presidents, there's probably no one who's done more to link those concepts than Jimmy Carter.
Representative Goyal, that is so fascinating. And to expand on that, for people who don't know, the apartheid system was when people who were non-whites were restricted on where they could own land, on what they could do for work?
Oh, I mean, far worse than that. I mean, it was really just an inhumane, brutal, immoral system that was decades long. And as an Indian American, there's a connectivity there too, because there's a very substantial Indian population in South Africa. And so, to hum a few more bars on this, Mahatma Gandhi, the connectivity here is got his training, you could say, in South Africa when he was part of the colored Indian population, and he discovered his passion for human rights in South Africa, famously thrown off a train in Pietermaritzburg, and then developed an entire civil rights movement and human rights struggle in South Africa that he then took to India. And the Indian independence movement is what then inspired Martin Luther King to do the nonviolent civil rights movement here in America. So there's an incredible triptych there, you could say, of human rights and civil rights. And again, the Carter family and Jimmy Carter was right squarely in the middle of all of that. And he put himself in that legacy. Again, compared to what our political leadership and system looks like today, it's pretty awe-inspiring and pretty moving that we had a leader with that much vision and courage.
Now, Raj, talk to us a little bit more about the late president's childhood, because of course those formative years are so important to how one grows up to view the world and to choose their leadership style. And he grew up born in Plains, Georgia. He was the first president born in a hospital, actually. That really places him on the timeline of where America was at that time. Tell us, what was his childhood like?
Well, from what I've read, and of course just from my research, it sounded like a very typical almost story. And if I'm not mistaken, his mother was a nurse, I think, and so that was actually, I think she, and I must say as a personal note, my mother is a retired obstetrician. So we always in our family, my mom and dad first became citizens in 1977. Their first vote for president was for Jimmy Carter in 1980. And we were in Wichita, Kansas, which is not exactly a very democratic place. So I grew up steeped when I came of age. We were Democrats, and they voted for Jimmy Carter. And so Jimmy Carter's childhood, I have to say, as a child of immigrants, is sort of interesting. It's not dissimilar in a sense to the very rural upbringing of my parents. So when I was reading about Jimmy Carter, I felt a lot of connectivity there as well. And so his story is just remarkable, of being raised in Plains, going to the Naval Academy, being a star graduate, and then, as you know, he was on a great path in the military. And I think the story goes that when his father was gravely ill, he just up and moved to Plains, and Rosalind was unhappy. And he even later, I think as a husband and as a father and as a man, Jimmy Carter can teach us a lot. He actually later said, I can't even imagine, I didn't consult my wife. I just moved our family and I made a decision that I had to go back to run the farm. Now unthinkable, in today's world, but at that time was very common. And so Rosalind Carter, by the way, shouldn't be overlooked in this story. Her funeral was amazing. And again, my friend Jason Carter gave an amazing speech for your viewers. Should get that on YouTube at his grandmother's funeral. But she was like an Eleanor Roosevelt figure, really charting her own path, flying around the world. She was an eloquent, very strong voice for human rights and the Carter legacy. So, what a story, a 77-year marriage, if we could all be so lucky. And, and I have to say, Jimmy Carter not only did all these amazing things, he seemed to have, we thought he was never going to pass. He beat cancer. He was in hospice for, I think over a year. Really, really remarkable stuff he was made of.
Speaking of the late president's hardiness, if you will, I want to talk about this very interesting story. Actually, I was talking to a member of the DOJ under the Carter administration just yesterday, and he mentioned this story of when a young Jimmy Carter was deployed to go help with the Chalk River nuclear disaster up in Canada.
Yes.
They said, it was dangerous. They were worried if he would come out of it okay, if he was going to be able to live long after, have kids. And here we are later now, lived to be a century old, 4 kids, numerous grandchildren. I think that also says a lot about his character there. Oh,
absolutely. There's a lot about the mind-body connection there. But as the story that I've read several versions of it. But yes, he was up in Canada, and they had to go in. It was something out of Star Trek. They had to put on the hazmat, and they had to go in there, and they were exposed to radiation, and they had to basically reassemble, disassemble. I'm not sure, obviously, exactly technically what they had to do to solve the situation. And I believe he tested for high levels of radiation for up to a year afterwards. So they didn't really know, but what a courageous person, him and his whole team, to go do that. And he walked into it. And the other point is that he had the cancer struck his family deeply. He lost siblings, he lost parents. So he was actually, I think, really one of those folks who maybe thought had a sense of mortality, that he was lucky to live so long, and now of course he beat the mortality charts, beat the actuarial tables profoundly. So Jimmy Carter beat the odds in many ways.
Longest living former U.S. president is really remarkable.
Absolutely.
And one of the things that President Jimmy Carter said was that the best thing that he did was marrying Rosalind Carter.
Well, I think a lot of us who can relate to that in terms of marrying up. But yes, Rosalind Carter, as I said before, was a remarkable force in her own right. They were really 1-2 combo. And I can say, as somebody who's been on the ballot 3 times and held elected office, political stress, all stress is difficult, and in your work-life balance. But politics is a very public game, and it can be very brutal and it can be very nasty. So having that bond with your spouse to really, and that's not a partisan thing, obviously, that happens on the Republican side, the Democratic side. Nancy Reagan and Ronald Reagan had an incredible bond that was that I think was very notable and to be lauded. So their marriage and their bond, I think, is an incredible part of their story. And since I mentioned Ronald Reagan, I was working in Washington in 2004 when President Reagan passed, and I remember, I think it was a really I like this tradition, I think we all should, that we honor a fallen president regardless of party. I watched the Reagan funeral. I was not a fan of Ronald Reagan's policies in any way, shape, or form, but he certainly was a distinguished 8-year president, and it was a beautiful ceremony and very moving to watch and to see world leaders laud the president and so on. I'm very happy that we're very sad to lose President Carter, but I'm happy that the American traditions here of honoring a fallen president, regardless of party. Very happy to see Speaker Johnson and Majority Leader Thune lead the charge here, with obviously Kamala Harris there as a Democratic vice president. I think speaks very well of our of a political culture that I think we can all agree has taken a lot of attacks and is certainly not at our best moment in American history right now.
Thought-provoking insight from you, Representative Goyle. And for those of you who are just tuning in, you are looking at the rotunda, the U.S. Capitol, the very solemn ceremony of the procession carrying Jimmy Carter, former President Jimmy Carter's remains, to the Capitol, where he will lie in state. And this is something that's very important because he was a leader in foreign policy as well. Some actually credit him with the dissolution of the Soviet Union.
Well, certainly that would be a great, the forces of Ronald Reagan would of course bitterly oppose that idea, but I think it's got a lot of merit to it, which is the Carter legacy not only bringing stability to the Middle East, with obviously the Camp David Accords, which were massively historic, and then of course laying the groundwork for containment and continuing the Cold War in a thoughtful, practical way. Very, very important. And it's funny now that the Panama Canal, of all things, I think it was just today, President-elect Trump was talking about taking the Panama Canal back by force, perhaps. These are not really, I think, credible statements. And Jimmy Carter's stewardship of handling what was a very major foreign policy crisis. There was a civil unrest in Panama. Panama is a very important strategic partner to America in Central America, and he handled it very deftly. And I think historians will look back very fondly and with respect for the Carter presidency, not only on domestic policy, but also on foreign policy. Right.
In terms of these foreign policy, I think you could see a lot of parallel between what was happening during Carter's presidency and what's happening today, right? The Camp David Accords back then, the Iran hostage crisis back then.
Afghanistan.
Absolutely.
Yes.
So from what we see with Carter's legacy, what are you hoping will come into the next administration that could echo what President Carter had?
It's a great question. I think that my hope would be, and of course I don't think President-elect Trump is spending a lot of time probably taking my advice, but I think what the Carter legacy would say, that I think would demonstrate the importance of having a muscular foreign policy, but obviously always valuing diplomacy. That does not mean ever suborning American interests to bilateral or multilateral coalitions, but using multilateral coalitions in an effective way to advance American interests. So Jimmy Carter, was no fool. Jimmy Carter knew exactly what America's interests were, and he was willing to fight for that anytime. And I think his actions, as you mentioned, Kevin, around the Soviet Union, his forceful denunciation of their invasion of Afghanistan was very important. And, you know, I do think it was unfortunate, obviously, of what happened in the rescue attempt in Iran. But I think, again, history will look. There was a great article in the New York Times this week about some of the hostages that were still alive who thanked Jimmy Carter, because they didn't know what was happening, but Jimmy Carter was absolutely obsessively, in fact, he even says perhaps too much so. He cared maybe too much because, you know, there's a lot of priorities on a president's table about getting those hostages home. And I think it's worth noting that there is some pretty credible evidence that there were some forces at play that tried to delay the hostages' return so that it could give credit to President Reagan. I certainly hope that's not true, because everything should be about the welfare of Americans, particularly who are in a tragic situation like that in Tehran. But Jimmy Carter was obviously instrumental in getting those hostages home.
Well, Representative Goyle, thank you for that very deep insight. And right now you're watching NTD's special coverage of President Jimmy Carter's Capitol Rotunda service, which will continue after this short break, so stay with us.
A performance that truly matters for each and every one of us. This is what you've been waiting for. See it at least once in your lifetime. Coming to Dorothy Chandler Pavilion, January 17th through the 19th. Buy tickets now at shenyun.com. Imagine a coffee that cares for your health. Expertly fermented with a 50-enzyme complex to enhance flavor and remove bitterness. Small batch roasted to a decadent medium dark, resulting in a brew that is gentle on digestion, low acid, and up to 90% less caffeine than regular coffee. Try America's first enzyme fermented coffee today.
Are you over the age of 50 and considering buying an annuity in the next 60 days? I have some important news for you. Don't buy an annuity until you understand the pros and cons of annuities. Call now for this free book on maximizing your income in retirement. Annuity Do's and Don'ts for Baby Boomers from one of the nation's leading financial firms. That's right, free. This book reveals little-known truths about annuities in simple-to-understand terms. Grab a pen right now, because we're about to offer you this free book that unlocks the 5 little-known truths we believe baby boomers and seniors should know before buying an annuity, and it's free. Call 800-360-0943. As a bonus, we'll also throw in a free annuity rate report. We researched numerous products and summarized rates and benefits of annuities, all from Silac Insurance Company. Call 800-360-0943. That's 800-360-0943. Call now.
Discover the ancient secret to vitality and longevity with Puretang Black Ginseng. Crafted from premium 6-year-old Korean ginseng, each root is carefully nurtured for over 2,260 days, undergoing a traditional 9-round handcrafted process of steaming and drying to unlock full potency and absorption. Experience pure, natural energy with Puretang Black Ginseng. Order now at puretang.com.
Even the mighty might not see it coming. It's prediabetes, and it captures 1 in 3 adults. But you can escape. Take the 1-minute prediabetes risk test at doihaveprediabetes.org. Be your own hero.
I've known President Carter for 30 years, and he made someone uncaring into a very caring, compassionate person. I can't tell you how much of a better person I am just by associating with him and seeing the kindness in his heart.
My name is Sandra
Walters. And the way I know President Carter is that my husband and he grew up together here in Plains. My husband is from Plains. He grew up right across the street over here, and they went to the same church that Jimmy and Rosalind went to. He would come from the front door, but he'd come straight back here, and this is where he would always want to sit, right here at this table here. And he felt like that he was at home here. He was a politician, and he was involved in that, but more than that with us, he was just a friend and a neighbor. And so he would come down here to my house. I would have a dinner, or I had a taco soup supper every night, every Christmas.
He had only love in his heart. He wasn't, let's say, a fan of all the presidents, but he wanted to see everyone succeed. And that's the difference.
Thank you, Lord, for letting him live 100 years and do all the things that he wanted to do. And I think he accomplished so much that who could be sad over anybody who had done what that man had done from a little town in Plains, Georgia, raised on a peanut farm, and became the President of the United States.
I hope the world remembers him as a giver, giver of kindness, giver of goodness, giver of caring for other people, and a giver of making a difference in many, many people's life, because he certainly made a difference in my life.
And we're continuing the discussion with Raj Goyal. He is a former Kansas state representative and a political strategist who knows President Jimmy Carter personally and has connections to the Carter Center, which is really great that we have you here with us. Let's talk about the oil crisis that President Carter oversaw and how he was able to navigate through that. That must be very challenging. You go from like 6 million barrels a day produced by Iran down to about 500,000. You got long lines at the gas stations, but he was able to actually use this to advantage by boosting more innovations through energy, right?
Well, the Jimmy Carter legacy on having solar panels on the roof of the White House and the things that he talked about then, to be honest, he was too ahead of his time. And even he would acknowledge that the politics of that moment weren't maybe handled as well as he would have liked, but he was such a policy guy and such a technocrat in a way that he wanted to get it right, and he was right. The Jimmy Carter energy policy is the right policy, but you know, the messaging on it and the political framing on it wasn't ideal for the time. And of course, then candidate Reagan used that successfully to prosecute a case in the 1980 election. But I think you're exactly right that Jimmy Carter, I mean, now imagine if we had just kept the solar panels up. You know, of course, Ronald Reagan had to go rip them out, you know, which was obviously counterproductive, inefficient, cost us money, but it was all political symbolism and political theater. And so one of Jimmy Carter's great legacies is substance, of doing the right thing, sometimes when it wasn't even politically palatable, like on civil rights in the South. You know, there was a lot of easy shortcuts you could take when you're a white male governor in the 60s in the South. You didn't have to take on these fights. I feel a kinship to Terry Sanford, who was a legendary governor of North Carolina, and sort of in that same fraternity of sorts of progressive white Southern governors in the 60s and 70s down in the South. And I really don't think they get enough credit in American history for it, because it's those kind of leaders. In addition, of course, the real heroes are the people on the front lines and the activists who are making change. But you also need those political leaders who give space for real monumental social change to happen.
Well, it's 1979 when the Shah fled Iran, and then all oil exports stopped right there. And after that point, Carter proposed an $88 billion initiative to boost innovation, synthetic fuels coming out of shale and coal, for example, and then also just more innovation, trying to get the renewable energy, biomass, even ocean energy, geothermal, you name it.
Absolutely, and I mean, there were very important things he did on technical policy, on, you know, what ended up being the computer age, a really important presidency because he invested, you know, he was a scientist. I mean, as we talked about, you know, he put on, it was like something out of The Simpsons. He put on the suit and went into a nuclear reactor and fixed it. You know, this was a guy who understood technicalities, and he understood the role. We didn't use that term then of STEM, but you know, he was really the first technocratic president who really understood engineering. and he had that engineering mindset. By the way, that engineering mindset wasn't always so great for political theater, and it wasn't always so great for political strategy, although, I mean, pretty amazing guy to come from Plains to become the governor of Georgia and the president of the United States. And, you know, as a Democrat, I have to say, when I came up in politics, Jimmy Carter was sort of viewed a little bit like, well, he was a one-term guy. He had ushered in the Reagan era. And then when Bill Clinton finally won back the White House for us in 1992, it had been 12 long years. But it's really important to understand and mark and recognize what Jimmy Carter did in winning back that White House in 1976. You know, some people say, oh, it was the Watergate era, any Democrat could have won. That's not the case. It was a very difficult election. He came out of nowhere in that Democratic primary, and he really met the moment. You know, one of the cool things about Jimmy Carter, he was a big Grateful Dead fan. He was friends with the Allman Brothers. You know, I'm a big REM fan. You know, they're from Athens, Georgia. Michael Stipe posted something online that he had a little note from Jimmy Carter that said, I'd like to get one of your CDs. You know, I mean, you know, he was that kind of guy. He loved music. He understood the cultural zeitgeist. Big article in the New York Times that he ushered in jeans. You know, he was a peanut farmer, you know, and I loved in that segment there of his actual friends. The ultimate thing about Jimmy Carter, I would have to say, the ultimate essence is that he was a citizen. More than he was even a president. A lot of politicians talk about that they honor the citizenry, but they're really not. Jimmy Carter was so authentically himself. You could just imagine him. I never had the pleasure of sitting in his living room. You know, you can imagine him with a TV tray, just watching TV, talking about this brilliant genius of a guy. But he was that kind of person. And he was so accessible and down to earth. And it's frankly almost a lost art in today's politics.
Shifting from the public sphere for a second, I want to talk about Carter's personal life. You know, he really was a family man. Of course, as you mentioned, married for 77 years. Yeah. Crazy. And then we heard just a couple days ago when his son was delivering that speech in memory of his father, talking about how his father spent every day of Christmas vacation tutoring him on Latin so that he could go back to school and retake this exam that he had failed. And he came back with 100. I think it's so admirable to see such a family man and then have him as the U.S. president. Oh, absolutely. I mean, I think that what he, and you can see it today. I mean, look, the family is completely aligned in their grief and in their sadness. You know, I think all of us and everyone watching has lost a family member, and it doesn't matter what age it's at. It's a terrible thing when you lose a parent, a grandparent, anybody who's a loved one. And so it's wonderful to see the family come together. And again, as I said, I'm friends with Jason, who's the chairman of the board of the Carter Center, and he, ever since I've known him for 30 years, has been a great public servant in his own right. You know, he served in the state senate in Georgia. He ran for governor himself. He's a great lawyer. You know, he cares about his community, and that's the legacy of his grandfather, Jimmy Carter. And I think there's many of us who really feel a kinship to that and are Democrats today and public servants today because of an inspirational example like Jimmy Carter.
Representative Goyle, let's delve further into economic policy. But first, for those joining us, what you're seeing on the screen right now is the Capitol Rotunda. It looks like they have a pedestal set out for the 39th president, Jimmy Carter, and the procession carrying his remains, the caisson, has arrived at the steps of the Capitol. Now, let's talk economic policy. So we had the New Deal liberalism that was changed and transformed within the Democratic Party under President Carter into this neoliberalism. He was working on a market-oriented approach, reducing regulation and things like that. Can you expand on how that exactly played out?
Well, sure. I mean, you know, Jimmy Carter's presidency, now we think of it a bit more transitional in the sense that we had, of course, the New Deal era, and then we through the Kennedy-Johnson era, and then after the Nixon presidency, it's funny because Richard Nixon today would be several clicks to the left of some Democrats, because you know, one thing we don't realize in politics is that politicians and elected officials are often surfing the wave and they're reactive to these macro forces. So at that time in the 70s when Richard Nixon was president, I mean, he created the EPA. You know, he did environmental regulations that would be anathema to today's Republican Party. I mean, today's Republican Party would repudiate almost everything Richard Nixon did and a lot of what Ronald Reagan did. So politics shifts and changes. So what Jimmy Carter was able to do was, of course, to win back the White House. And yes, he was, of course, as a peanut farmer, as a small business person, more oriented toward the right mix of public-private partnership and the role of the private sector in the economy. And so he was an important force, and I mentioned it earlier, which was that Ted Kennedy primary in 1980 was really important. That was really more about, I think, style and kind of set and maybe less about public policy. And of course, it was a sense that Jimmy Carter had really faltering approval numbers, so Ted Kennedy sensed a political opportunity. But that divide in the party that you're getting at, you could imagine, you can say, I think with some good credibility, that the Kennedy wing in 1980 did represent more of that New Deal 60s era philosophy of government, and Jimmy Carter really was ahead of the curve. Not only did he win that primary, but that way of thinking has actually won over and animated the Clintonomics, which dominated the 90s and, of course, paved way for Obama and Joe Biden.
And it certainly is very innovative what President Carter was doing, because according to Prospect.org, that New Deal liberalism was marked by the welfare state, regulating key industries, protecting organized labor. But in the era of Donald Trump and Elon Musk, we hear about the Doge and everything, what they're planning. Carter saw this as an inefficient means of government program, and he said that he wanted to reduce the size, reform the welfare policies, deregulate, and even expand global trade.
Well, yeah, I mean, to be fair, the New Deal, many of us think the New Deal was an incredible success, and you can ask the people who we pulled out of the Great Depression, and Franklin Roosevelt lifted more people out of poverty than any president since Abraham Lincoln. So I don't think it was so much a repudiation of the New Deal in any way. It was more just an expansion, and the New Deal obviously was enacted in the 1930s and early 1940s, really in the 1930s. So by the time Jimmy Carter's president, we're 40 years hence. And so, of course, economic policy is going to shift and change. And right now, to bring it to today, we have a very active debate within the Democratic Party. Of course, that was a really terrible election night just 9 weeks ago for those of us in the Democratic Party. And we are now at a crossroads ourselves as a party again, as you're mentioning, in terms of the route we're going to take. And I think a lot of us think that the reform-minded ethos of Jimmy Carter, the anti-corruption ethos of Jimmy Carter would be very relevant if the Democrats want to be a winning party again.
And I want to talk a little bit about foreign policy as well, but not when he was in office, actually when he left office, because we saw he actually stayed very involved with these issues, notably when he personally went to North Korea to negotiate with Kim Il-sung about the nuclear weapons program. Talk to us a little bit more about that.
Well, I think that, as we mentioned earlier, that Jimmy Carter set the standard for the post-presidency. Again, I tend to reject this separation. People say, oh, maybe not such a, even your package mentioned, well, the presidency was this, but the post-presidency, it's a common through line, and the same values that animated the presidency animated his post-presidency. But he set the model with the Carter Center about how he used his time, no paid corporate speeches, wrote books, taught Sunday school, did nonprofit work, used the bully pulpit and the stature of being an ex-president to solve public policy issues. And in regard to that trip, he also became a bit of a troubleshooter, and he said to any president, regardless if it was Bill Clinton or George Bush or Ronald Reagan or whomever, I'm here to help. I'm here to serve if it's consistent with his values. And so and then if you recall, he also helped in Haiti. He went down to Haiti, I believe on Bill Clinton's request, to try to broker a compromise and try to get a settlement there, because it was also, he had credibility on the issue because the Carter Center was doing this work all over the world. He was monitoring elections and raising standards of election and democracy all over the world. And as they say, in the darkest corners of the world where there is no media exposure, he was doing that tireless, thankless work. And one thing that's worth mentioning, because you had asked about his family, his mother served in the Peace Corps in India. And so Indian Americans who were politically involved when I was a kid, not only, I think I mentioned earlier that my parents were very proud, their first votes as Americans were for Jimmy Carter in 1980. I would always hear from my mom, his mom, Lillian Carter went to India on the Peace Corps. So incredible maternal influences. We're all very much shaped by our mothers, of course, but Jimmy Carter had an incredible marriage to Rosalind, an incredible mother. So he's really a modern American man in many ways.
And not just that, not just overseas, even back here in America, personally getting his hands dirty building those houses with Habitat for Humanity. And you see those photos, what he was well into his 70s, 80s. I believe even in his 90s he was still helping.
Yes, I think we saw in one of your packages there. I mean, even though he looked like most people would be watching golf on TV, or here he was, hammering nails and doing what needed to be done. Again, a physical, he was obviously physically very impressive as an engineer and as a military man, but also great stamina. And one thing I got to notice, I didn't realize he had a great head of hair. I mean, if you notice, I was seeing in that Nobel Prize acceptance, and even at Rosalind Carter's funeral, so he was blessed with some great genetics. We can agree to that.
Well, Raj Goyal, former Kansas state representative, thank you for this very valuable and in-depth insight into President Jimmy Carter.
Thanks, Kevin. Thanks, Fiona.
Thank you, Raj.
Thanks for having me.
And the Rotunda service in Capitol Hill will be starting soon.
Senate Majority Leader John Thune, House Speaker Mike Johnson, and Vice President Kamala Harris will deliver eulogies.
Our live coverage continues after this short break.
Sometimes business travel takes you to London, Paris, New York, Rome, Beijing, or Hawaii. And sometimes to Palawan, Mimaropa. Here at Book a Limo, we think globally. We think business, your business. It doesn't matter where you go. No place is too far. We're there for you.
What's your destination? Book a Limo. Any car, anywhere.
Hi, I'm Susan Lucci. I never thought about heart disease until I had my own heart event. I received 2 stents in my arteries, stents developed through research funded by the American Heart Association. Those stents saved my life. I have met so many survivors. Each of them tells a story that can be so helpful to women out there.
Everything was pretty good. It was a very happy life. I was given the diagnosis that I had peripartum cardiomyopathy, which is basically a pregnancy-induced heart failure. They told me my only chance was a heart transplant.
And the American Heart Association helped make that possible. Their research helped save me.
I think everyone should support the American Heart Association. Call now or go to helpheart.org. For only $19 a month, just 63 cents a day, you can help fund the next medical breakthrough. Get the next person trained in CPR, the next hospital certified in high-quality cardiovascular care. You can be part of that very important work that the American Heart Association is doing to save lives everywhere. Give $19 a month with your credit card, and we'll send you this special t-shirt that you can wear to show that you are helping save lives.
I'm grateful for just every day that I get with my children. I am very thankful for the American Heart Association.
Heart disease is America's #1 killer, and your support now can help save your life or the life of someone you love. Listen to your heart. The only reason I'm here today is because I did. So please call the number on your screen or go to helpheart.org now. Join me as a monthly donor today and help save even more lives.
Thanks for staying with us on our special coverage. Former President Jimmy Carter earned a reputation as a committed humanitarian after his presidency. Here's a look of his life after the White House.
I, Jimmy Carter, do solemnly swear.
Jimmy Carter received an outpouring of tributes and remembrances following his death at the age of 100.
He set an example for all of us.
I am so in awe of him.
And I'm sure President Carter, he's in heaven now with his wife.
He served just one term in the White House after being sworn in at the age of 52. But it was the decades after his presidency that even he acknowledged were his most successful, saying, quote, "I can't deny I'm a better ex-president than I was a president." After leaving office in 1981, Carter earned a reputation as a committed humanitarian. He and his wife Rosalind founded the Carter Center in 1982 to alleviate human suffering. Executive Director of the George Washington Presidential Library, Lindsay Chervinsky, explains.
The Carter Center was really the first to raise funds and support to try and eradicate disease, to try and help with human rights, try and help protect voting rights, to try and help protect the sanctity of elections around the globe.
Carter's nonprofit helped lead global efforts to eradicate guinea worm disease, a debilitating parasitic disease transmitted through contaminated water, by providing health education in Africa and helping maintain political will.
In terms of the disease around the world, they actually helped eradicate a couple of diseases, guinea worm, and then I think it's also called river blindness. And so the Carters really funneled funds and attention to help eradicating a couple of those diseases. And in doing so, they have saved the lives of millions of people, which is just a remarkable feat.
There were an estimated 3.5 million cases of the disease in 1986. In 2023, only 14 cases were reported. Carter, who left office profoundly unpopular, gained global acclaim as a voice for the disenfranchised.
Prior to him, most former presidents went home and were pretty quiet because that was the expectation. Now, that didn't always rub everyone the right way. Sometimes he was involved in foreign policy, or he would speak out about foreign policy in a way that some of his successors felt was inappropriate.
But Chervinsky says his humanitarian work was hard to criticize. Carter won the Nobel Peace Prize in 2002 for his efforts to promote human rights and resolve conflicts around the world, from Ethiopia and Eritrea to Bosnia and Haiti. His Carter Center in Atlanta also sent international election monitoring delegations to polls worldwide. Here's Carter in Ethiopia in 1993.
I don't see the separability of peace and democracy and human rights and the alleviation of human suffering and in the future sustained development. I see these as an integral part of the life of a human being or the life of a nation.
For decades, the Carters worked with Habitat for Humanity, which helped build homes for people in need.
And so when they went to build a house for Habitat for Humanity, perhaps they weren't the fastest worker, maybe they weren't able to hammer as many nails as the person next to them, but by being there, they were bringing awareness to the cause and to the effort. And so in doing so, they were able to raise enormous amounts of money and public awareness of this effort.
Carter wrote more than 24 books, ranging from a presidential memoir to a children's book and poetry, as well as works about religious faith and diplomacy.
His decency, his goodness of spirit, his long-lasting marriage, his commitment to his faith and acting that faith out through deeds, not just words. Those are things, and I should say also his far-reaching vision about the importance of environmental protections. Those are things that almost made him more cool in the 2020s than they did in the 1970s.
And here you see that they are firing the cannons outside of the Capitol, where the procession has just arrived, carrying the remains of late President Jimmy Carter with the horse-drawn caisson and the casket that you see there.
That's right. As you can see there, they are now lowering the casket out of the caisson. It is draped in an American flag. You see the flag flying behind the casket as well.
What a solemn occasion here. It's not every day that you get to see a former president of the United States lie in state at the Capitol Rotunda.
That's right, and let's just tune in for a second, listen to that music, and get a feel for what's happening on the ground there.
Hopefully we'll be able to resume our audio feed of the scene. What you are seeing here is a view from the rotunda of the Capitol down onto a pedestal, and the military pallbearers are carrying the casket of 39th President Jimmy Carter up the steps. You're seeing President Jimmy Carter's grandson. That's Jeff Carter that you just saw there. That is his son, and his grandson's there as well.
Ready, step. 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 Ready, step.
President Jimmy Carter was certainly a man of action, taking the reins, creating the Department of Education, and that was something that was previously tried to come off the ground, but it never did. But he was able to cement that into the federal government, and as well as taking a stand for human rights. For example, calling out South Africa's apartheid system, in which there was racial segregation there.
That's right, and now we are seeing a view inside the rotunda, where as you can see, the seats have really filled up. We are still waiting for the late president's casket to be carried into the center and placed there on that pedestal. Now, the Vice President Kamala Harris will be delivering a eulogy, as well as Speaker Mike Johnson and Majority Leader John Thune.
Yes, the schedule includes a time for Congress members to pay their respects to the late president, followed by the lying in state of the former president, and there will be a military guard of honor during that time at about 6 p.m. And we see that some of his family members are in attendance. We just saw Jeff Carter, one of his sons, and possibly their sons as well, his grandchildren at the Capitol. And there is Senate Majority Leader John Thune, who will be speaking this evening.
That's right. Beside him is Senator Elizabeth Warren. Everyone is standing, waiting for the casket to enter the rotunda.
Yes, a very solemn ceremony, having flown to Joint Base Andrews and then the procession down Pennsylvania and Constitution Avenues to the U.S. Capitol, where family members and politicians will be able to pay their respects to the 39th president, who lived to be 100 years old.
That's right, very impressive age, an entire century there. Now, earlier this morning, we did see the remains of the late president aboard Special Air Mission 39, of course, a symbol of him being the 39th president of the United States, flew into Maryland, and then when the casket was first taken off, it was first taken to the Navy Memorial, of course, an ode to the Navy career that the late president had.
You're seeing Senator Amy Klobuchar as well as Senator Tom Cruise on screen here, there to pay their respects to the late President Jimmy Carter. And he was a man who championed foreign policy, putting pressure on allies, even a risk that he was willing to take to improve their human rights in their countries, as well as pressuring regimes across the world, even putting, for example, grain embargo on Soviet Russia in order to get them to give more protections to their civilians, and also even boycotting the Moscow Olympics in order to reduce the international standing of the Soviet communist bloc.
That's right. Some even say that the former president was the one who really institutionalized human rights into the U.S. government and brought human rights as an issue in the forefront of U.S. foreign policy. And there we see Vice President Kamala Harris has entered the rotunda.
Yes, and Second Gentleman Doug Emhoff, her husband, is there with her.
That's right, and beside him, House Speaker Mike Johnson.
Yes, who will also be speaking this evening. And the International Report on Human Rights, something that is ordered by Congress to procure each year, was championed and initiated by President Jimmy Carter, a shining example of his legacy for human rights, through which he was given he won the Nobel Peace Prize in his efforts to spread democracy across the world and improve human rights in various countries.
That's right, and there we see some of those guests standing, waiting for the casket to enter the rotunda.
Yes, on the left-hand side of your screen, you're seeing Senate Minority Leader Chuck Schumer beside Hakeem Jeffries, House Minority Leader.
That's right.
Very solemn day. His family must be going through so much, and it's a very dignified ceremony for the late president, coming out of 1 or 2 years of hospice care, leading a very full and active life.
That's right. We'll just tune in for a second to the rotunda as we see the final attendees coming in before the casket comes in.
Let us pray. Eternal Father, strong to save, whose arms have bound the restless waves, we thank you for the inspiration of a consequential and laudable life as we celebrate the legacy of James Earl Carter, Jr., the 39th President of the United States. We proclaim your generosity to this nation and world for giving us the gift of someone with the ethical congruence to be salt and light to his generation. Lord, he made the world more palatable. We thank you for his passion for integrity, his commitment to leave the world better than he found it, and his exemplary love for his precious Rosalind. Inspired by his great life, teach us to know you more clearly, to love you more dearly, and to follow you more nearly each day. We pray in your matchless name. Amen.
Madam Vice President, Mr. Speaker, Leader Schumer, Leader Jeffries, Jack, Chip, Jeff, Amy, and other members of the Carter family, and distinguished guests. Today we gather to begin a final farewell to Jimmy Carter, Navy veteran, peanut farmer, Governor of Georgia, and President of the United States. Sunday school teacher, Nobel Prize winner, advocate for peace and human rights, and first and foremost, a faithful servant of his Creator and his fellow man. In a commencement speech he delivered at Liberty University back in 2018, President Carter told a story about going on a mission to Massachusetts back in his younger days under the auspices of the Southern Baptist Convention. During that trip, President Carter was impressed by the success of a fellow missionary in winning souls to Christ. And so as the mission was winding down, he asked him what made him so successful. He was a little embarrassed by my question, President Carter recalled, but then he finally said, I try to have two loves in my heart. One love is for God, and the other love I have in my heart is for the person who happens to be in front of me at any particular time. It was a statement, President Carter said, that he never forgot. I think it's fair to say that it's also a statement he lived by. President Carter's term as president ended in 1981. And for the remainder of his life, the longest post-presidency of any American president ever, he focused on making the lives of his fellow men better. That meant things like the Carter Center, which, among other things, works for the eradication of disease in some of the poorest areas of the globe. And it meant things like his work with Habitat for Humanity to provide affordable housing for those in need. And when I say his work with Habitat for Humanity, I do mean his work. Jimmy Carter knew that his status as a former president could bring attention to good causes. It's why he encouraged Habitat to make use of his name and image. But simply lending his name, or maybe attending a gala or two, wasn't Jimmy Carter's style. He was here to get down in the weeds and the dirt And he did that literally on numerous habitat builds, including one back in 1994 in Eagle Butte in my home state of South Dakota. Well into his 90s, he could be found with his hard hat and tools on construction sites doing the practical work required to get families into homes. The Son of Man did not come to be served, but to serve. And Jimmy Carter did his very best to live according to the calling of his Lord and Savior. Today, I join all Americans in mourning President Carter and remembering his example. But I rejoice in the thought that he, together with his beloved wife, Rosalind, is now before the face of his Father.
To the family, to Jack and Chip and Jeff and Amy, the entire Carter family, Vice President Harris, members of the cabinet, Leader Thune, my colleagues in Congress, and my fellow citizens. We meet in this sacred hall of self-government to honor an extraordinary man, a man who modeled the virtues of service and citizenship, as well as any other American. Surrounding us are the statues of those who gave their time, their energy, and their lives for the good of America. Before us lays a man who now joins their midst as a patriot, a veteran, a humanitarian, and the 39th President of the United States. When Jimmy Carter walked out on the east front of the Capitol and took his oath of office, I was just 4 years old, and he's the first president that I remember. Looking back, it's obvious now to me as an adult why he captured everyone's attention. Jimmy Carter was a member of the greatest generation. He lived through the Great Depression. He did that on a farm in rural Georgia. He knew the value of a dollar, and he modeled thrift his entire life. As long as he was in office, he hated government waste. His father, an Army veteran of the World War I era, taught patriotism to his children. And eventually his son, this young man from Plains, followed his father's example of self-sacrifice, and he joined the Naval Academy in the middle of World War II. In the Army, Lieutenant Carter learned from the legendary Admiral Rickover to always do his best as he served on the first fleet of nuclear submarines. It's telling that today the USS Jimmy Carter, a top-secret attack submarine, now roams the oceans, bearing the name of the only president who served in such close quarters. President Carter's life, his selfless service, his fight against cancer, and his lasting contributions to his fellow man are all truly remarkable. Whether he was in the White House or in his post-presidential years, as was discussed, President Carter was willing to roll up his own sleeves to serve and get the job done. We all know about his work with Habitat for Humanity, and that was mentioned. And the origin story goes that it was in 1984, when he first became aware of the work. He was in New York for a friend's anniversary. Millard Fuller, the founder of the fledgling charity at the time, called President Carter and asked if he wanted to visit a site in Brooklyn during his trip. President Carter agreed, and he found his way down to the Lower East Side. Standing on the roof of a dilapidated building, he looked out on the wealth of Wall Street to the south, to the power of Midtown Manhattan to the north. And then he looked down, and he saw an image he'd never forget. An elderly woman cooking breakfast over an open fire in the rubble of the building, there in the heart of the richest city in the world. The Habitat for Humanity worker that was there with him turned to President Carter and said, if there's anything that you can do, we would take it. He said, if there's anything I can do, let me know. The worker said, well, maybe you can send some volunteer carpenters from your church. It was the very next day that President Carter called Habitat for Humanity and told them he was going to send some carpenters, all right, and that he himself would be one of them. And thus began his famous tradition of donating 1 week every year to build and restore homes for his fellow Americans. It's remarkable to think that one of the 45 men who has served as president and one of the only 13 who held the role in the nuclear age would humble himself to such service. We all know that his care for humanity didn't stop at building homes. In the face of illness, President Jimmy Carter brought life-saving medicine. In the face of conflict, he brokered peace. In the face of discrimination, he reminded us that we are all made in the image of God. And if you were to ask him why he did it all, he would likely point to his faith. I'm reminded of his admonition to, quote, live our lives as though Christ were coming this afternoon, and of his amazing personal reflection. Quote, if I have one life and one chance to make it count for something. We all agree that he certainly did. So today, in these hallowed halls of our republic, we honor President Carter, his family, and his enduring legacy that he leaves, not only upon this nation, but upon the world.
Leader Thune, Speaker Johnson, Leader Schumer, Leader Jeffries, members of Congress, and distinguished guests. It is an honor to be with you this afternoon, and to Jack, Chip, Jeff, Amy, and Jason, and all the other members of the Carter family. On behalf of the American people, Doug and I offer our deepest condolences. Being with you today, I'm reminded of the enduring words of a favorite hymn. May the works I have done speak for me. Today we gather to celebrate the life of a man whose works will echo for generations to come. A man from Plains, Georgia, who grew up without electricity or running water and served as the 39th President of the United States of America, and lived every day of his long life in service to the people. President James Earl Carter, Jr. So I was in middle school when Jimmy Carter was elected president, and I vividly recall how my mother admired him, how much she admired his strength of character, his honesty, his integrity, his work ethic and determination, his intelligence, and his generosity of spirit. We have heard much today and in recent days about President Carter's impact in the 4 decades after he left the White House. Rightly so. Jimmy Carter established a new model for what it means to be a former president, and leaves an extraordinary post-presidential legacy. From founding the Carter Center, which has helped advance global human rights and alleviate human suffering, to his public health work in Latin America and Africa, to his tireless advocacy for peace and democracy. And Jimmy Carter was the President of the United States who was ahead of his time. He was the first president of the United States to have a comprehensive energy policy, including providing some of the first federal support for clean energy. He also passed over a dozen major pieces of legislation regarding environmental protection, and more than doubled the size of America's national parks, including protecting our beloved redwoods in my home state of California. He was a president who, between the years of 1977 and 1981, appointed more Black Americans to the federal bench than all of his predecessors combined, and appointed 5 times as many women. And in the wake of Watergate, Jimmy Carter passed historic ethics legislation to help rebuild America's faith in government. Jimmy Carter, as president, was also a respected global leader. To be sure, the years of his presidency were not without international crises or challenges, but his legacy of global leadership is well established. In Asia, he instituted full diplomatic relations with China, which he would later call one of the most historically significant accomplishments of his presidency. And his legacy lives on in the Middle East because, do recall, in the decades before Jimmy Carter became president, Israel and Egypt had been at war numerous times. Few thought peace could be achieved between them. Yet Jimmy Carter did that. Through his persistence and perseverance, through his unshakable belief in the power of American diplomacy, he secured the Camp David Accords, one of the most significant and durable peace treaties since World War II. And throughout the world, Jimmy Carter elevated the role of human rights in America's foreign policy priorities and uplifted the importance of civil society in doing that work. Jimmy Carter was a forward-looking president with a vision for the future. Consider his establishment of the Department of Energy in 1977, which anticipated the central role it would play in addressing the climate crisis. His creation of FEMA in 1979, which enabled our nation to mobilize a national response to disasters, which has helped countless communities rebuild and recover. And his founding of the Department of Education later that year, which elevated public education institutions and increased national standards for the education of America's children and future leaders. Jimmy Carter was that all too rare example of a gifted man who also walks with humility, modesty, and grace. Recall the stories from the 1976 campaign about how he slept in the homes of his supporters to share a meal with them at their table and to listen to what was on their minds. How on their first trip for Habitat for Humanity, Jimmy and Rosalind rode the bus with the other volunteers. And when the group stopped for the night to stay at a local church, Jimmy and Rosalind gave their private room to a young couple who had put off their honeymoon to join the trip. And with the other volunteers, they then slept on the floor of the church basement. And then, of course, his work to eradicate the vicious guinea worm disease that once disabled millions of people a year. It was one of the Carter Center's greatest triumphs. And Jimmy Carter, of course, given his nature, attributed its success not to his own leadership, but to the thousands of everyday Africans who were on the ground doing the work. Throughout his life and career, Jimmy Carter retained a fundamental decency and humility. James Earl Carter Jr. loved our country. He lived his faith, he served the people, and he left the world better than he found it. And in the end, Jimmy Carter's work and those works speak for him, louder than any tribute we can offer. May his life be a lesson for the ages and a beacon for the future. May God bless President Jimmy Carter, and may God bless the United States of America.
And that there was Vice President Kamala Harris delivering her eulogy at the memorial service for former President Jimmy Carter. And now the late president will lie in state until Thursday.
And we'll have special coverage of his state funeral on Thursday morning.
Thank you for tuning in to our special coverage today. I'm Fiona G.
And I'm Kevin Hogan. Stay with us for NTD Evening News at 6 p.m. Eastern, 3 Pacific.
At Book a Limo, we're more than a team. We're a family dedicated to your perfect ride.
From our website to mobile app booking, our AI technology is top-notch and with you in mind.
I'm honored to be the friendly voice to kick off your experience. Booking a ride has never been easier.
I choose Book a Limo for a VIP experience on every ride.
What's your destination? Book a limo, any car, anywhere.